The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. We're reading today from Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. This is from chapter 1. It is only natural to begin this book where fascist politics invariably claims to discover its genesis, in the past. Fascist politics invokes a pure mythic past tragically destroyed. Depending on how the nation is defined, the mythic past may be religiously pure, racially pure, culturally pure, or all of the above. But there is a common structure to all fascist mythologizing. In all fascist mythic pasts, an extreme version of the patriarchal family reigns supreme, even just a few generations ago. Further back in time, the mythic past was a time of glory of the nation, with wars of conquest led by patriotic generals, its armies filled with its countrymen, able-bodied, loyal warriors whose wives were at home raising the next generation. In the present, these myths become the basis of the nation's identity under fascist politics. In the rhetoric of extreme nationalists, such a glorious past has been lost by the humiliation brought on by globalism, liberal cosmopolitanism, and respect for universal values such as equality. These values are supposed to have made the nation weak in the face of real and threatening challenges to the nation's existence. These myths are generally based on fantasies of a non-existent past uniformity, which survives in the traditions of the small towns and countrysides that remain relatively unpolluted by the liberal decadence of the cities. This uniformity, linguistic, religious, geographical, or ethnic, can be perfectly ordinary in some nationalist movements, but fascist myths distinguish themselves with the creation of a glorious national history in which the members of the chosen nation ruled over others, the result of conquests and civilization-building achievements. For example, in the fascist imagination, the past invariably involves traditional patriarchal gender roles. The fascist mythic past has a particular structure which supports its authoritarian hierarchical ideology. That past societies were rarely as patriarchal, or indeed as glorious, as fascist ideology represent them is beside the point. This imagined history provides proof to support the imposition of hierarchy in the present, and it dictates how contemporary society should look and behave. In a 1922 speech at the Fascist Congress in Naples, Benito Mussolini declared, "We have created our myth. The myth is a faith, a passion. It is not necessary for it to be a reality. Our myth is the nation. Our myth is the greatness of the nation. And to this myth, this greatness, which we want to translate into a total reality, we subordinate everything." Here, Mussolini makes clear that the fascist mythic past is intentionally mythical. The function of the mythic past in fascist politics is to harness the emotion of nostalgia to the central tenets of fascist ideology: authoritarianism, hierarchy, purity, and struggle. With the creation of a mythic past, fascist politics creates a link between nostalgia and the realization of fascist ideals. German fascists also clearly and explicitly appreciated this point about the strategic use of a mythological past. The leading Nazi ideologue, Alfred Rosenberg, editor of the prominent Nazi newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, writes in 1924, "The understanding of and the respect for our own mythological past and our own history will form the first condition for more firmly anchoring the coming generation in the soil of Europe's original homeland." The fascist mythic past exists to aid in changing the present. The patriarchal family is one ideal that fascist politicians intend to create in society, or return to, as they claim. The patriarchal family is always represented as a central part of the nation's traditions, diminished even recently by the advent of liberalism and cosmopolitanism. But why is patriarchy so strategically central to fascist politics? In a fascist society, the leader of the nation is analogous to the father in the traditional patriarchal family. The leader is the father of his nation, and his strength and power are the source of his legal authority, just as the strength and power of the father in the family in patriarchy are supposed to be the source of his ultimate moral authority over his children and wife. The leader provides for his nation, just as in the traditional family the father is the provider. The patriarchal father's authority derives from his strength, and strength is the chief authoritarian value. By representing the nation's past as one with a patriarchal family structure, fascist politics connects nostalgia to a central organizing hierarchical authoritarian structure, one that finds its purest representation in these norms. Gregor Strasser of the National Socialist Nazi Reich was the National Socialist Nazi Reich propaganda chief in the 1920s before the post was taken over by Joseph Goebbels. According to Strasser, for a man, military service is the most profound and valuable form of participation. For the woman, it is motherhood. Paula Seiber, the acting head of the Association of German Women, in a 1933 document meant to reflect official National Socialist state policy on women, declares that to be a woman means to be a mother, means affirming that the whole conscious force of one's soul, the value of being a mother and making it a law of life, the highest calling, is not just to bear children, but total devotion to her role. How Fascism Works is the book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. It is Wednesday, so Congressman Mark Pocan is on the line with us. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the state of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives, along with a few colleagues. I believe it's the 2nd District. And his website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
I have been speculating openly on the radio all this week, basically since Helsinki. That was a real tipping point for me. Prior to Trump's just groveling with Putin and sitting there with his hands in a prayer mode, you know, holding his hands as if he were praying while Putin is sitting there like he's, you know, Merv Griffin or something, a talk show host. I prior to this week, my thoughts on Trump and Russia were largely financial. That is to say, there's this long train of evidence of Russian mobsters and Russian oligarchs laundering their money through Trump hotels, or the allegations of that. And that, frankly, without all this Russian money, which Eric Trump told a reporter about in 2014, without all this Russian money, Donald Trump would be living in a cardboard box on Skid Row, and his daughter and sons would have to get real jobs. And his wife would probably leave him. And I think that's what, I've always thought that's what he's afraid of. And I still think that's the most likely prospect. But there are people now who are publishing, incredible journalists in the Atlantic, publishing pieces suggesting that Trump has had a connection to Russia going back even to the 80s, and that somehow he's either useful idiot or actual agent. I mean, this is a striking conversation for us to be having. And I think the actual agent part may even have a small percentage of possibility, like 10% or something. I'm curious your thoughts on all this.
I mean, the one thing we know, Tom, about Donald Trump is his number one priority for this country is Donald Trump and his family. And, everything he has done has been to expand his business enterprise to make more money for him and his family. And I think, the strongest prospect for this probably is still that this is all about Donald Trump making money for himself and his family, and that's why he does what he does. Although I got to admit, I was stunned on Monday. I really didn't know how to respond at first when I saw that, because I was like, this is even over the top for someone who's often over the top. And it certainly just adds to either he is truly ignorant or he is truly being deceitful. Either way, that doesn't make me comfortable when he's the president and he's acting like that.
Yeah. Speaking of Trump and his presidency, he has basically said we as a nation are not going to pay attention to our own laws with regard to asylum seekers, which say that if somebody shows up at our borders or in one of our embassies and says, I'm under serious and legitimate threat, and I'm willing to basically go to court, an American court, to demonstrate that, you're supposed to let them into the country and give them a court date. And well over 90% of the time, they show up for that court date, and sometimes they end up being deported, and sometimes they end up being granted temporary status as a refugee. That's both international treaty and federal law, and he's ignoring both. And now the federal courts have pushed back and said, A, you have to reunify these families, and now you've got a new court ruling about B, you've got to stop these deportations. This is illegal under U.S. and international law. Your thoughts and Congress's thoughts on that, Congressman Pocan?
Yeah, everything about this, there's no way to sugarcoat it. It's about racism, right? It's appealing to the racist part of his base that loves to talk about the wall. Donald Trump actually doesn't benefit from having a wall. In fact, when Chuck Schumer offered him money for a wall, he wouldn't take yes for an answer because he just wants to go to rallies and talk about the wall and motivate that racist element of his base. But in doing so, he's done things like zero tolerance, which really are zero humanity, which have separated children from families, put children in cages. And while he's now stopped separating children and families, we still have 3,000 children we need to reunite with their parents. In some cases, they've completely lost the ability to do that. There's a court-mandated deadline. It was already for children under 5. They've missed that for many of them. But in 8 days from today, every single child is supposed to be reunified. And Congress is too afraid to take this on because there are many in the Republican Party who agree with the policy of separating children from their parents and caging children. So this is really truly disgraceful. It's a very much a black eye on this country. And I think, we need to be far more vocal. In fact, today we're going to be on the floor talking about this because it is truly an un-American practice to do what's happening. And yet Donald Trump is doing it, and the Republican Congress has been completely complicit.
Yeah. Our lines are lit up with calls from all over the country for you, Congressman. So let's just jump right into it here. Rich in Calumet, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Hey, Congressman. The first thing I'd like to say is the posturing that Mr. Trump was showing with holding his hands together. I took a class on body language. He's trying to present himself as a businessman with pushing himself forward, although his facial expressions show that he is basically over his head.
Your question, Rich,
part is
for the congressman?
Yeah, the question is, I believe we're in a world crisis from corporations. Is there anything that we can do besides massively getting out and voting, and what some people have been doing and protesting and stuff like that?
Yeah, and Congressman, also, in addition to that, is Congress contemplating doing anything about what Dan Coates says is a flashing red light of insecurity in our voting systems?
Yeah, so to both those issues, let me take the second one first. As you know from this program, I have several bills out there to address election systems. Even last night, Tucker Carlson, I was on his show, and he even said we should have paper ballots for machines. Why can't we move something as simple as some solutions around that front? And yet Congress, I don't think, is really interested in having fair elections. Otherwise, we wouldn't be allowing states to have voter ID laws and other things that suppress our citizenry from actually participating. But, Rich, your point is very valid. However, I don't see this Congress, Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell, growing a spine in the next few weeks, even though they know their backs are against the wall because of November. Elections have consequences. We're paying for the consequences of 2 years ago, November. We have the opportunity coming up in November, but if you don't like what people in Congress are doing, you have to change their faces. And that's true for state legislatures, governors, and all the rest. So we have a lot of work to do. It's great that we have these protests to bring people together so that they can see that there is strength in numbers. But bottom line, elections have consequences, and we have to look at that way at November.
Dave in Pittsburgh, California. Dave, you're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Yeah, I have a question to ask Mark Pocan. There's a petition going around on the House floor to bring Ollie Pie net neutrality and force Speaker Ryan to bring that to the floor and a vote to force net neutrality to be reinstated. And I was wondering if they're ready to force the speaker to bring that to the floor in a vote. And I'll take your answer offline. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thanks, Dave. Absolutely, there is something on the floor that if we get 218 people to sign a discharge petition, we can force this matter like the Senate did. They got it done in the Senate, so we're the only holdup. And I believe virtually every single Democrat, if not every single Democrat, but I know the vast, vast, vast majority of Democrats already signed that. Our problem is getting Republicans too, because to get to 218, I think we're at 193. That's the number of Republicans we have to bring on board.
It's going to be a challenge. but hey, we got one Republican yesterday, right?
Let's just keep working.
Yeah, there you go. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan taking your calls, and we'll be back with more of your calls for him. His website is pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, R-E-P, as in representative, Rep Mark Pocan. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Coming up on 16 minutes past the hour, we'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. And welcome back. Anita, watching Free Speech TV in San Antonio, Texas. You are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Yeah, I do think they have compromise on Donald Trump. He has been totally freaked out about that dossier. Remember in James Comey's book, he talked about how Donald Trump would call him and insist that it wasn't true. He was constantly talking about that dossier, and in particular about the Russian prostitute thing. And I don't really care what it's about anyway. If they're attacking our sovereignty, what else is more important? And why aren't we talking about these bots that are out there that are spreading propaganda? We need to educate people. They targeted Bernie Sanders voters last time. We need to be out there educating people about these bots.
Well, and they targeted Republicans too last time, and independents.
Well, no, but they targeted Bernie Sanders voters on purpose to suppress the vote.
Oh, and by the way, they were targeting Hillary Clinton voters too to suppress the vote, to discourage them.
Well, it doesn't say that in the. It doesn't say that in any of the.
All you have to do is go back and look at the ads. They've published the ads.
Well, I know, but the
anyhow,
indictments, investigation.
So your question
didn't
for
show
the
that.
congressman.
My question is just, what are we doing to educate Democrats,
Right.
people who would vote Democrat? Because remember, they broke in and got 500,000 voters off of a Democratic list. Those were Democratic voters. Those were people who were like in swing states. We don't know what state exactly, but I'm pretty sure it must have been a swing state with 500,000 voters' information on there. They were targeting people. They can target individual voters.
Do you think, Congressman, that it's even possible that 500,000 voters ended up on Chris Kobach's list and ended up getting bounced off voter registration rolls in Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Pennsylvania? Or am I total tinfoil hat here? Thank you, Anita.
Well, I mean, clearly, they've hacked into companies that make voting machines. They tried to hack into government entities that run elections. I mean, there is a clear intent what was going on there. And, Anita, to your question, we've been talking about this for quite a while. I think the single best bit of putting this forward right now is the fact that Mueller has indicted 12 people over this. So it is now officially, we said, that we know who did this. I mean, it's unequivocal to everyone but Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, depending on the day you ask him. But everyone else gets it. And you're right, it is a real threat. There's a culture of corruption right now in Washington. They talked about drain the swamp very effectively, but what he didn't tell you is he just drained it a little bit so he could dredge it bigger and build a high-rise luxury condo on it. They've taken it to a new level. We need to make that a central part of what we talk about this November.
We have 40 seconds to the break, Congressman. That's a fascinating statement because just as recently as a couple of weeks ago, your colleagues in the Democratic Party and the Progressive Caucus were saying, we need to talk to Americans about bread and butter issues. The Republicans are screwing them on taxes. The Republicans are talking about doing away with Social Security and Medicare. The Republicans are working, with big business to destroy unions and keep down wages. But now you think that this has reached such a crisis that it's become an electoral issue.
The big three issues I think you're going to see us talking about this year is the culture of corruption around here, because everyone talks about it, healthcare, prescription drug prices, and need to invest in infrastructure and create those good family-supporting jobs.
Yeah, okay, good stuff. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And Russ in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Pocan. Mr. Pocan, you're in the progressive part of our party. I've been scratching my head. Every week, Maria Teresa Kuma comes on and tells us how close the race is in Texas. maybe you can help me. How come somebody didn't ask the Castro brothers to run? It seemed like this would have been the guy they would want to lead to.
You're talking about
get
against
on the
Ted
ticket.
Cruz?
Yeah, against Ted Cruz. I mean, why didn't they ask them guys? They seem like that would have been the guy they want to run against. But or do you have something bigger planned for these two? Because they do. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing a point.
Russ, I think this is one where people just self-select to run down there. I think the brother who was cabinet secretary has been eyeing the White House. I think his brother, who's my colleague here in the House, is very active with intelligence and committee and other things. But Beto O'Rourke is an awesome candidate. Beto beat a Democrat incumbent to get to Congress. He is as genuine and authentic as you can get in a candidate, and he is going to every county in Texas, including the most deep red districts, to show people what a Democrat is and gaining a lot of support because of it. So I don't think you could have been more strategic than what they're doing right now, in that Beto is such a unique type of candidate, running on no corporate money and doing an outstanding job of getting his message across. So I'm a very, very big on Beto O'Rourke.
Yeah, we've got to get him back on the show. He's a good guy. Andrew in Columbus, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Hi. Everybody's wondering why Donald Trump is freaking out, and I think it's one thing that he might be found out as being a money launderer for Russian billionaires, but wouldn't that lead the FBI to have the ability, if they find that out, to seize his properties, and then he would truly be up a creek? I mean, I know you're not head of the FBI, Congressman, but is that a possibility in your professional opinion?
Well, I mean, clearly, they're looking at lots of things. In fact, a few weeks back, and it kind of got lost, the story, that they got another 100 subpoenas over the Paul Manafort, part of what they're working on. There's a lot more to come. You're now at 33 indictments. I believe it's 33 indictments in about 17 months. You spent 4 years. They spent 4 years on Benghazi, 0 indictments. 2 years on Clinton's emails, 0 indictments. And in just not even a year and a half to have 33 indictments, they're doing a great job on what they're working on. We have to let them keep doing what they're doing. But I think they're digging and digging, and we're going to come to, I think, a decent conclusion because of the work that's happening. Right now, Congress, after Monday, we should have on the floor a resolution to protect the Mueller investigation. If they don't, they are complicit in whatever Donald Trump is trying to do to stop it.
Amen. Sharon in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello?
Hey, you're on the air.
Good morning. Good morning. Actually, I have a question about the Social Security supplemental coverage that you had talked about a few months ago, and you had indicated that there was a particular company that you preferred. Could you tell me what that was again?
Are you asking me or Congressman Pocan?
Actually, I'm asking you, Mr. Hartmann.
Oh, Sharon, I'm sorry, I can't answer the question. There are a number of companies that offer supplemental Social Security insurance, but that's not a call. We'll talk about that another time. Call on a Friday. Ivan in Chicago. Hey, Ivan, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Congressman. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Evan.
Have you noticed the one sound clip the mainstream media, including MSNBC, is completely ignoring?
Which is?
The AP reporter asked Putin, did you want Trump to win? And Putin answered, yes, I wanted Trump to win. Why aren't the Democrats pounding this over and over again? Because, excuse me, as the Steele dossier pointed out, Putin hated Hillary because of the sanctions Obama put on him. I think this is a message Democrats should be pounding.
Yeah, Ivan, I'll tell you, there's a whole bunch of things that could be talked about from that interview, from him saying he holds both countries responsible. He hasn't walked that back. From saying, going after the FBI, he hasn't walked that back. From talking about Putin's offer on the 12 people that were indicted, he never asked to have them extradited to the U.S. He hasn't walked that back. He defended Putin over and over the intelligence officials. So there's a lot of material from Monday. I think we're all still, I don't want to say dissecting, but we're still kind of digesting how a sitting U.S. president could be that unpatriotic and say everything he said, which is why I think we led the show with, what's the real reason for all of this. So there's a lot of things out there that make us pause and have questions.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan is taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark, Wednesday edition, our usual day, here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And we'll be back with more of your calls for the Congressman in just a moment. You can check out his website at pocan.house.gov, pocan.house.gov. And his Twitter handle is, as in Representative Mark Pocan, it's Rep, R-E-P, Mark Pocan.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. We're reading today from Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. This is from chapter 1. It is only natural to begin this book where fascist politics invariably claims to discover its genesis in the past. Fascist politics invokes a pure mythic past tragically destroyed. Depending on how the nation is defined, the mythic past may be religiously pure, racially pure, culturally pure, or all of the above. But there is a common structure to all fascist mythologizing. In all fascist mythic pasts, an extreme version of the patriarchal family reigns supreme, even just a few generations ago. Further back in time, the mythic past was a time of glory of the nation, with wars of conquest led by patriotic generals, its armies filled with its countrymen, able-bodied, loyal warriors whose wives were at home raising the next generation. In the present, these myths become the basis of the nation's identity under fascist politics. In the rhetoric of extreme nationalists, such a glorious past has been lost by the humiliation brought on by globalism, liberal cosmopolitanism, and respect for universal values such as equality. These values are supposed to have made the nation weak in the face of real and threatening challenges to the nation's existence. These myths are generally based on fantasies of a non-existent past uniformity, which survives in the traditions of the small towns and countrysides that remain relatively unpolluted by the liberal decadence of the cities. This uniformity, linguistic, religious, geographical, or ethnic, can be perfectly ordinary in some nationalist movements. But fascist myths distinguish themselves with the creation of a glorious national history in which the members of the chosen nation ruled over others, the result of conquests and civilization-building achievements. For example, in the fascist imagination, the past invariably involves traditional patriarchal gender roles. The fascist mythic past has a particular structure which supports its authoritarian hierarchical ideology. That past societies were rarely as patriarchal, or indeed as glorious, as fascist ideology represent them is beside the point. This imagined history provides proof to support the imposition of hierarchy in the present, and it dictates how contemporary society should look and behave. In a 1922 speech at the Fascist Congress in Naples, Benito Mussolini declared, "We have created our myth. The myth is a faith, a passion. It is not necessary for it to be a reality. Our myth is the nation. Our myth is the greatness of the nation. And to this myth, this greatness, which we want to translate into a total reality, we subordinate everything." Here, Mussolini makes clear that the fascist mythic past is intentionally mythical. The function of the mythic past in fascist politics is to harness the emotion of nostalgia to the central tenets of fascist ideology: authoritarianism, hierarchy, purity, and struggle. With the creation of a mythic past, fascist politics creates a link between nostalgia and the realization of fascist ideals. German fascists also clearly and explicitly appreciated this point about the strategic use of a mythological past. The leading Nazi ideologue, Alfred Rosenberg, editor of the prominent Nazi newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, writes in 1924, "The understanding of and the respect for our own mythological past and our own history will form the first condition for more firmly anchoring the coming generation in the soil of Europe's original homeland. The fascist mythic past exists to aid in changing the present. The patriarchal family is one ideal that fascist politicians intend to create in society, or return to, as they claim. The patriarchal family is always represented as a central part of the nation's traditions, diminished even recently by the advent of liberalism and cosmopolitanism. But why is patriarchy so strategically central to fascist politics? In a fascist society, the leader of the nation is analogous to the father in the traditional patriarchal family. The leader is the father of his nation, and his strength and power are the source of his legal authority, just as the strength and power of the father in the family in patriarchy are supposed to be the source of his ultimate moral authority over his children and wife. The leader provides for his nation, just as in the traditional family, the father is the provider. The patriarchal father's authority derives from his strength, and strength is the chief authoritarian value. By representing the nation's past as one with a patriarchal family structure, fascist politics connects nostalgia to a central organizing hierarchical authoritarian structure, one that finds its purest representation in these norms. Gregor Strasser of the National Socialist Nazi Reich was the National Socialist Nazi Reich propaganda chief in the 1920s before the post was taken over by Joseph Goebbels. According to Strasser, for a man, military service is the most profound and valuable form of participation. For the woman, it is motherhood. Paula Seiber, the acting head of the Association of German Women, in a 1933 document meant to reflect official National Socialist state policy on women, declares that to be a woman means to be a mother, means affirming that the whole conscious force of one's soul, the value of being a mother and making it a law of life, the highest calling is not just to bear children, but total devotion to her role. How fascism on the line, works. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Heather in Seattle, listening on KBCS. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I'm going back to the 2016 election just for a moment. And when Obama did not declare war against Russia for declaring war on us, in a sense of getting into our election, that was an act of war. And the Democrats did not declare that or did not respond to that as an act of war should have been responded to. So I'm wondering why still the Democrats are not focusing on this, that we are at war, and that this president is aiding and abetting the enemy. We know that. But I'm really concerned about the lack of democratic response in such a forceful way of a declaration of war.
Sure. I don't think when you use a declaration of war, it should be for very, very serious, in very serious ways. I'm not saying it's not serious what they did, but an unprecedented attack on our elections. But, I think there's a lot of other reasons why that may not be the best terminology for us to use. I do think at the time a lot of this was evolving, finding out what exactly they're doing, and now it's a lot easier to look back and put it all together and see the Russian involvement and why we know what they've done. And that's why we're trying to take it very seriously now, which is why many of us didn't want them to get together this week. We wanted him to ask for the extradition of the 12 people, and we are trying to talk about it in strong terms as possible. But I personally, as someone who considers myself trying to focus on peace before war, I just don't know if that's the best terminology, although I certainly appreciate and understand the sentiment you're expressing.
Tony in Stafford, Virginia. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. My question is, if the Democrats take back the House in November and in January, whoever becomes Speaker, will they ever hold hearings to what's going on in Congress now in the House of Representatives? Like how they're lapdogs to the president instead of an equal body. And then they're not really giving a true investigation of what's going on.
Yeah, Tony, great question. And, I think there will be plenty of hearings to hold people accountable where they should be. It's been truly pathetic watching the House Republicans, especially Devin Nunes over in the Intelligence Committee, just completely give up our co-equal branch of government status and let the White House get away with anything without even questioning it. You know, the good news, and Tom, I think this is something, I don't know if I brought it before on the show, but, you know, we have a dozen Progressive Caucus members that are ranking members on committees that will be chairs of committees should we take the majority, and 30 that are ranking on subcommittees. And subcommittees are also very, very active. So the progressive movement is well poised should we take the majority, and I can assure you some of the folks that have been very outspoken on this, from Maxine Waters to Jerry Nadler and everyone else in between, are Progressive Caucus members. So we'll make sure that folks are held accountable.
Yeah, remarkable. Let's see here. Dave in Springfield, Missouri, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan. Dave?
Okay. This is David. Putin had some good reasons to not like Clinton, and that would be Libya, Syria, what her people ended up in Ukraine and Egypt. So he had some legitimate things. But the big thing that we're dealing with right now is Kobach's scam, which stole millions of votes. Mueller's got to run into that. And is he going to hold Kobach responsible legally for any of this?
Yeah, David, first I want to just push back a little bit on your first statement. I don't care if Vladimir Putin has reasons not to like Hillary Clinton. That doesn't give you any excuse to have an unprecedented attack on the election. So I still think it's very valid that we're pushing on that issue. I also completely agree with you that as a separate issue, which we can walk and chew gum at the same time, we can point out what they're doing to try to suppress the vote, from everything from voting list purges to photo ID laws and a whole lot of other things. And we do have a list of reforms that I've seen the House Democrats have put forward that are part of our strategy as we talk about November, that the culture of corruption here in Washington has to stop, and many of these things around voting rights are central to that. So I think you're going to talk about both, but I'm not going to give Vladimir Putin a pass for an unprecedented attack on our elections. There's absolutely no excuse, and there has to be accountability.
Jim in Simsbury, Connecticut, I guess it is, watching us on Facebook Live. Jim, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Jim, you have to listen to your phone, not your Facebook Live. I'm sorry, Jim. I'm going to have to move along to another caller here. Tom in Miami. Tom, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. I know you're in the Congress, not in the Senate, but I had a Senate question. McConnell stole a judge, stopped the probe from being publicized. Now he's saying if they do it again, we're going to do something. Cannot Schumer call for maybe a vote of no confidence? Maybe there's a few senators on the Republican side would like to become the majority leader. Is there anything he can do there?
Yeah, unfortunately, for all the occasional positive statements from Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski or something like that, I think it would be a non-starter for them to go against their leadership. So while you would hope that they would have the integrity to maybe be willing to do some of that, I think it's a very difficult ask.
Steve in Minneapolis, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, Mark, did your governor, Scott Walker, accept emoluments from the red-headed NRA infiltrator?
Yes, Steve. So Steve's bringing up an issue that the NRA operative, the Russian agent, there's a picture of Governor Scott Walker and her together at some meeting that they had, which, again, is just part of this, additional conversation about Russian influence that's going now down to even the governors and other Republican elected officials. My argument, if I was people pushing back on this, I would be saying anyone who took NRA money should give it back, because if the NRA has had an infiltrator, we don't know how much of that money came from Russian sources and others. Until we have a thorough accounting and audit of what's there, I have to consider that money tainted. And I think that should be something that people should be pushing, not just in Wisconsin, but nationally.
Holly in Marshall, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I have a question about poll numbers and who is polled. I've heard on Fareed Zakaria that Trump has a 61 approval rating, and I thought, well, he doesn't say that the GOP is 26% of the electorate, so that's only 14% approval rating. And the other thing is, this morning, in the same vein, I heard that there was a drop in interest in the Mueller investigation, where I, every day, see dozens of stories pertaining to the Mueller investigation. So I'd just like your opinion on that. Thank you.
Sure. I got the first part. I don't know if I got the second part. On the polling, just so you know, there's a lot of different pollsters, and it depends on what sample they use and everything else. I often look at when there's an amalgamation of a number of polls, and you look at the evening out, you probably get some of the better results. Donald Trump is not at 51% support, even though an individual poll may have said that. And the second part, I'm sorry I missed, Heidi, the question.
I think our second part was that it's also being reported that across the United States, across all American voters, although I think Republicans are leading the charge, the support for the Mueller investigation is declining in the polls, or at least it was as of a couple days ago.
Yeah, although I think, again, I'm guessing after Monday a lot has changed once again.
Yeah.
John McCain, when John McCain writes a statement that's stronger than I would write, I think we're onto something on this.
There you go. John in Edgewood, New Mexico, listening on iHeartRadio. You're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Congressman Pocan, in the Albuquerque Journal, there was highlighting Michelle Lujan Grisham on her gubernatorial run. And she said several things that really disturbed me, but one that really set me off. It says in the article, speaking about those in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party who are openly hostile to the oil and gas industry, Lujan Grisham says they've lost their minds. Two things bother me here. First is global warming first, but second, just that she would use that language. And then later on in the article, even make comments about Maxine Waters. Were you aware of this? And how can I continue to support her for governor?
Yeah, so I haven't seen the comments, and I also haven't seen the context, like what the question was. Sometimes, trust me, it's happened to me. I read an answer in the paper to something I said, and it's completely not what I said. So I think what I would recommend to you, John, is next time you get a chance to go to a forum or an event, ask her directly, and that's the best way to get to the answer.
Yeah, if she's doing a good job of running, she should be out there meeting with the public.
Exactly.
So, yeah, or presumably you could call her office. Although I don't know, as a candidate, maybe not. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark, 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, his website, pocan.house.gov. And welcome back. And let's see here. Avanish watching us on YouTube in Haventown, Pennsylvania. Please correct your name if I've mangled it. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. Yep, that's correct. I want to ask about a new Voting Rights Act. Given that the right-wing Supreme Court seems to be undermining democracy, do you think if the Democratic Party takes control of the House, we could have congressional hearings about the voter suppression, gerrymandering, caging, faulty voting machines, on top of the Russian hacking, and maybe down the line we could have a new Voting Rights Act, or even maybe a constitutional amendment that guarantees a citizen's fundamental right to vote? Thank you.
Yeah, Vinesh, thank you for your question. So Keith Ellison and I are the lead authors on a bill to actually have a constitutional amendment to guarantee a right to vote. Constitutional amendments are not easy, but it helps to let people understand that there is not an explicit right to vote in the Constitution, as pointed out through Bush v. Gore, and why we need to do that. The good news is we had a press conference probably 4 to 6 weeks ago on the steps of the Capitol talking about the reforms that we would put out there, from gerrymandering to ethics and campaign reform to voting rights law, and that is central to what we're looking at. Unless we have a vibrant democracy and a democracy that works for everyone without the corruption that we currently have, we don't have a democracy, and that is central. So I'm very excited that will be some of the first things that we take on when we take the majority.
Dave in Seattle, listening to KBCS. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. Thank you both very much for your service. I think that we can all agree that maintaining the impartiality of the Supreme Court is crucial for the next 40 years or so. And just in the hearings that will be upcoming for Brett Kavanaugh, I think it's very important and crucial to mention that in his acceptance speech for that nomination, that he said during his years teaching as a professor at Harvard, he taught his students that separation of powers is very important for maintaining liberty in our country. And the only reason that he's now receiving this nomination is because the legislative branch led by Mitch McConnell refused to do their job and disabled the executive branch.
Right. So we're hitting a break here, Dave. What's your question for the Congressman?
Mitch McConnell did the antithesis of the separation of powers, and can that be brought up during the hearings for
Okay, Congressman?
Yeah, I think it will, because clearly the Merrick Garland issue is still something very important in the discussion as we're moving forward in the Supreme Court. I think also, especially given this week, Kavanaugh's comments about you shouldn't go after a president while they're in office, all the more relevant as they're having their deliberations.
Yeah, Chuck Schumer sent out something on that this morning where they were, here it is. Judge Brett Kavanaugh 2 years ago expressed his desire to overturn the constitutionality of an independent counsel. So he wants to overturn Morrison v. Olson, which is pretty shocking stuff.
Yeah, and that better be central.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. And Denise in Chicago. Hey, Denise, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, thank you so much, Tom, for the opportunity, and what an honor, Congressman Pocan, to be able to chat with you. And I'll take my answer offline. But I just wanted to point out one area that I haven't seen, and maybe there is, but I have not seen a Democratic response to the Bannon propaganda that aligns with Trump agenda, and it aligns with much of what I've been hearing of the world reorganization of power and the realignment of power. And I just see that this is so corrupt and so awful that it is just deteriorating people's minds. And I just want to know if the Democratic Party is going to address that and be a little bit more forceful on it. And thank you again for the opportunity to ask this question.
And if I can add to Denise's question, Steve Bannon has been in Europe speaking to members of hard-right parties, fascist parties, and their sympathizers, and cranking up this stuff. And we're seeing this. I mean, in Europe, you've got Hungary and you've got Turkey that have both flipped right, hard right, and Poland's in the middle of it. Congressman, your thoughts?
Yep. Yeah, I think part of it with Steve Bannon no longer in the White House, the tension on him has been somewhat diminished by the media, yet he's still up to being Steve Bannon. And I think, his influence with Donald Trump, I used to think it was because he was around him, he influenced him. I actually think Donald Trump believes this stuff as well. I think every racist element that came out of Steve Bannon comes out of Donald Trump every single day. And I think they are in many ways the same person. So we've tried to call out, where we can, what he's doing. And, let's face it, he's picking fights with Canada, Germany, our traditional allies, trying to buddy up to Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. And even Kim Jong-un is making a fool out of the president right now by not actually living up to what supposedly they agreed on. And then one of the lines that Trump had from his meeting with Putin is, Putin's going to help us with Kim Jong-un. I just think he's out of his league. It's all about him trying to find ways to make more money for Donald Trump. Even in North Korea, when he was showing them videos of what they could be, that was almost like a pitch for the Trump families to be able to do real estate. This guy is a disaster on multiple fronts, and I think we're trying to find the best way to get that message out so that it resonates with the public.
Baja, New Orleans, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, how you doing?
Good.
I was thinking about the new regulations that the Treasury Department just set up, that they no longer are going to allow associations such as, or demand of associations such as the NRA, that they list where their contributions come from.
And the Koch brothers groups, too.
Yeah, so wouldn't that destroy what Mueller found out about the NRA and their donations?
Yeah, I mean, this goes, if I can take it a little broader, is just to disclosure period, and that's one of the problems we had with Citizens United, and why there's groups like End Citizens United and many others that are fighting on this issue is, if we lose the transparency, at least, of where the money comes in, it's going to make it harder and harder. These groups have fake front names. If you don't know who puts the money in, you can't look at why they put the money in, and this is another threat to our democracy. So I think one of the key things when Democrats get in, clearly transparency when it comes to elections and the funding is going to be really at the forefront.
Carrie in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. My question is, I know that I think it was Senator Mayhew tweeted the other day about subpoenaing the interpreter. And I'm just curious what you think the possibility of that actually happening is, because I know it's hard to get anything like that done. So I'm just curious what you think. What's the mechanism for that? Would it actually happen? Thanks.
Yeah, I can't speak to the mechanism. I apologize, Terry, but I can say, this, I think, is a really interesting common sense idea, because the fact that the president misspoke by 180 degrees, and now today it was announced that Putin said he's going to move ahead with the security agreement he had with Donald Trump that we don't know anything about because there's nothing talked about a security agreement. We need to know more of what happened in that meeting, and I think Senator Sheehan put that out. I think it's a great idea. How the mechanics would work, I don't know, but I think this is something that passes the smell test for the public. They would like to know, and I hope Democrats in the Senate will fight for that.
I wonder if Putin even got Trump to sign something. I mean, it's like I wouldn't put it past. It's just amazing. Congressman, we have about 30 seconds before we're going to hit a break here. What should we, or at the end of the hour actually, what should we be looking toward in the week coming up?
I'll tell you, it's important to me, but I think it's important to the country. This disgraceful practice of separating children and families at the border. We still have 3,000 children not reunited. They're supposed to be reunited by July 26th next week. I don't think we're going to hit that deadline. Republicans in Congress aren't going to stand up to the president. They're complicit. We need to speak out. This is truly un-American, inhumane, cruel, and the more we put pressure on the elected representatives to do something, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Mark Pocan, his website is pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Tom, as always.
It is such an honor and a pleasure to host you on this program. I'm so grateful that you do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back. We've got Dar Jamal is going to be on. We're going to be talking about some of his investigations into global warming and what's going on. And I'll continue picking up your calls. We've got more of the news of the day. Just stick around. It's going to be a great day.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back by Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction titled The Battle to Save Democracy. Excuse me. On September 2nd, 2009, the transnational pharmaceutical giant Pfizer pled guilty to multiple criminal felonies. It had been marketing drugs in a way that may well have led to the deaths of people, and that definitely led physicians to prescribe and patients to use pharmaceuticals in a way that for which they were not intended. Because Pfizer is a corporation, a legal abstraction, really, it couldn't go to jail like fraudster Bernie Madoff or killer John Dillinger. Instead, it paid a $1.2 billion criminal fine to the U.S. government, the biggest in history, as well as an additional $1 billion in civil penalties. The total settlement was more than $2.3 billion, another record. None of Pfizer's executives, decision makers, stockholders, owners, or employees saw even 5 minutes of the inside of a police station or a jail. Most Americans don't even know about this huge and massive crime, nor do they know that the criminal never spent a day in jail. But they do know that in the autumn of 2004, Martha Stewart was convicted of lying to investigators about her sale of stock in another pharmaceutical company. Her crime cost nobody their life, but she famously was escorted off to a women's prison. Had she been a corporation instead of a human being, odds are there would not have even been an investigation. Yet over the past century, and particularly the past 40 years, corporations have repeatedly asserted that they are, in fact, persons, and therefore eligible for the human rights protections of the Bill of Rights. In 2009, the right-wing advocacy group Citizens United argued before the Supreme Court that they had the First Amendment right to free speech and to influence elections through the production and distribution of a slasher documentary designed to destroy Hillary Clinton's ability to win the Democratic nomination. Some political observers assert that they did this in part because they believed that a black man whose first name sounded like Osama and whose middle name was Hussein could never, ever possibly win against a Republican, no matter how poor a candidate they put up. In that, they were following on a 2003 case before the Supreme Court in which Nike claimed it had the First Amendment right to lie in its corporate marketing, a variation of the First Amendment right of free speech. Corporations haven't limited their grasp to the First Amendment. Pretty much any and virtually every amendment that could be used to further corporate interests has been fair game. As you'll learn in this book, in previous decades, a chemical company took to the Supreme Court a case asserting its Fourth Amendment right to privacy from the EPA, snooping into its illegal chemical discharges. Other corporations have asserted Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, as well as asserting the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War to strip slavery from the Constitution, asserting that it protects their right against discrimination by a local community that doesn't want them building a toxic waste incinerator, commercial hog operations, or superstores. If this trend continues, it's probably just a matter of time before a corporation claims the Second Amendment right to bear arms anywhere, anytime, and your credit card company's bill collector shows up at your home with a sidearm. This legal situation is not only bizarre, but also quite the opposite of the visions for this country held by the founders of the nation and the framers of the Constitution. They were sufficiently worried about corporate power that they didn't even include in the Constitution the word corporation, intending instead that the states should tightly regulate corporate behavior, which the states did quite well until just after the Civil War. The American Revolution, you'll learn in this book, was in fact provoked by the misbehavior of a British corporation. Our nation was founded in an anti-corporate power fury. The most significant and oft-quoted precedent of the turning point of corporate power in America began just after the Civil War. It rested on a constitutional amendment successfully written and passed by a group of radical Republicans after the Civil War. That's what they called themselves, radical Republicans, to take slavery out of the Constitution. Given that today's Republican Party has, largely since the robber baron era of the 1880s, been the party of big business and the very rich, it's a bit difficult for some people to get their minds around the possibility that the Republican Party started out as a reform party, that for nearly 70 years, from before Abraham Lincoln until just after Theodore Roosevelt left the party to start a third party, had a strong progressive wing. But the Republican Party did. Although Lincoln was, by today's standards, a moderate Republican, he was still anti-slavery, pro-middle class, and pro-labor. In fact, he famously said labor is superior to capital because it precedes capital. Nobody has wealth until somebody makes something. And he was the first president both to use the word strike in public and to actually stop police and private armies from killing and beating strikers. And just like in today's mainstream Democratic Party, where there's a progressive minority that always seems to be pushing the edges, in the Republican Party of the 1800s, there was a very, even by today's standards, progressive faction. The radical Republicans were a splinter group that emerged in a big way from the Republican Party at its founding in 1854. And just after the Civil War in 1866, they gained a majority among Republicans in the House of Representatives, where they had a powerful influence until the faction disintegrated in the 1870s during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. They supported the absolute right of freed slaves to vote and participate in government. It goes on from there. Unequal protection, corporate power.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The most recent article, well, actually, I'm not sure if it's his most recent, but one of his more recent articles, Dar Jamail, writing over at truthout.org. It's titled, Global Temperature Projections Could Double as the World Burns. Dar Jamail is the independent journalist, author, staff reporter with Truthout. Truthout.org is the website. You can tweet him at Dar, D-A-H-R, Jamail, J-A-M-A-I-L, Dar Jamail. Dar, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be with you.
It's always great having you on the program. You have really been keeping up with what's going on in the world of climate change, its consequences, its rates of change, how things are happening, where things are happening. And I'd like to dig into that a little bit with you, if that's all right. Can we start first with the question of tipping points and increasing velocity of change? There are, in biological systems, like, for example, if a body gets infected with a flu virus, and it starts out there's a few viruses, and then there's a few 100,000, and then there's a few million, and then and eventually it gets to billions of viruses, and it starts to overwhelm the immune system, and the person gets sick, and sometimes it even kills them. But that rapid amplification that is part of this kind of the mathematics of biological and non-biological weather systems and things like that. How is that being played out right now with regard to climate change?
I think almost as usual, we can look up to the Arctic to see some of the more dramatic examples of that in the most recent months, where, for example, there was a cyclone up there that occurred in June that was one of the largest ever to hit in the Arctic, and also coming unusually early. And this comes on the heels of a spring where in the Barents Sea alone, that giant area this past spring lost 30% of its ice in just an 8-day period. So we're seeing these kind of very dramatic amplifications happening up in the Arctic. And then another recent report that I included in the dispatch that we published on Monday showed, again, affirming that what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. So as the overall sea ice volume up there and extent of it continues to decrease dramatically most every year now, that's actually causing weather pattern shifts all the way down into the tropics by changing ocean currents and altering wind patterns, which then, of course, alters rainfall to where, you look at the IPCC projections for Central America, for example, by 2100, and there's just going to be chronic year-in, year-out drought there. And the same can be said across the northern sub-Saharan Africa, as well as Spain and areas like this. So these are just a couple of examples.
Are there parts of North America that are being affected?
Without a doubt. Right now, half of the United States are in extreme drought. And as a result of that, in California, in the San Joaquin Valley, another study just came out and showed that parts of the San Joaquin Valley have already sunk 30 feet just since the 1920s because of so much groundwater is being pumped out of the aquifer, which essentially works as their savings account of water. Normally, there's enough rain and snowpack that's sufficient for agricultural irrigation, but there's so little of that now since NASA announced a few years ago California is most likely entering a period of mega drought, meaning a multi-decadal drought. And in fact, what's so alarming about the amount of groundwater they're doing to make up for it, the groundwater pumping they're doing to make up for the lack of natural water from normal weather patterns, that actually there's also parts of the San Joaquin Valley that have shrunk, that have dropped literally physically 3 feet just over the last 2 years alone.
I believe that California, and I'm guessing you probably know these statistics better than me, that when you're looking at food eaten by humans, as opposed to grains that are fed to animals or are exported, like soybeans, which could either be used as livestock feed or to make into tofu, that stuff is grown in the Midwest, but that the vegetables and fruits that we actually eat, that humans actually eat, the vast majority of my recollection is it's over 90% of the at least domestically produced fruit and vegetables are coming from California. If we lose those food-producing areas because they just run out of water, what happens?
Well, exactly. what happens. And I think that's where people get to use their imaginations, and we start seeing some extremely dramatic things. But the first and most obvious is food prices will go through the absolute roof. And if we look at, for example, this is a political nightmare for those in power, because one could argue that the Arab Spring started, at least predominantly, one of the key factors being climate disruption generated droughts, which escalated food prices, and the average person over there in these countries that erupted just couldn't afford to eat anymore, and that's what set it off. And
yeah, the price of bread doubled in Egypt and Tunisia, didn't it, just before the Arab Spring began?
Precisely. And on top of that, you mentioned the Midwest. There's also two other studies that were recently published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that showed, one of them showed that there's a dramatically increased risk of simultaneous crop failures once we see an increase of 4 degrees C, which is actually what we're currently on track to hit by 2100 if a current trajectory is maintained, which it probably will unless it actually increases. So a risk of increasing risk of simultaneous crop failures, coupled with another study that said that we're looking at the likelihood, if we hit 4C, of simultaneous crop failures in the main corn exporting countries of the planet, the U.S., China, Brazil, and Argentina, 86% chance of crop failure in all of those once we hit 4C. So again, we're looking at a growing food and water crisis as climate change progresses. It's going to impact the entire globe.
The most extreme bad situation scenarios that I'm familiar with are a massive melt of Greenland's water ice into the North Atlantic, shutting down the Great Conveyor Belt, which brings all that heat to Europe, and most of Europe, Central and Northern Europe, is at latitudes equivalent to Alaska, and parts of Canada where food simply doesn't grow. So you'd have massive famine in Europe if that were to happen. Or even more extreme is that if the Arctic sea ice continues to go and the permafrost in that region goes, that we had Charles Miller from NASA on this program a couple of years ago, and he said there is more carbon locked up, much of it in the form of methane, but also as carbon dioxide and other carbon compounds. There's more carbon locked up in the atmosphere in the northern, I think above 30 degrees or above 60 degrees north or whatever it is, than we have burned since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. That could be mobilized. That was his word, mobilized, which released into the atmosphere. If that happens, you could see a doubling of the consequences of climate change, which could lead to massive worldwide extinctions. In those two disaster scenarios, where do we stand right now? And do you want to add any to that or push back on what I just said?
Those are my concerns too, and I devoted an entire chapter in my forthcoming book to methane up in the Arctic simply because of that, and cite often that Charles Miller study that you referenced. And those are two very, very real scenarios, and they're both very, very concerning to me because both of the factors leading up to those eventualities are unfolding and increasing on a regular basis. So the Atlantic Meridional ocean circulation current that you referenced in regards to the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, there's been recent studies come out that show that is actually now slowing down hundreds of years ahead of schedule than studies that had referenced the same thing that came out just a couple of years ago. That's how fast this is speeding up. And then up in the Arctic, we look at the Barents. Literally right now, this month, there's people tracking the heating of the Barents Sea up in the Arctic, underneath which we're already seeing major methane releases starting to happen, methane plumes starting to come up. So I think we're at grave risk of what Natalia Shikova, another methane researcher, formerly with University of Alaska Fairbanks, has warned of a methane burp, literally a 50 gigaton release of methane all at once if one of these whole shelves goes all at once, that she says is a very distinct possibility and could already happen at any moment.
And that could bring much of life on Earth to an end?
It would add so much. It would literally do what you just warned, but in a matter of minutes. It would release an amount of carbon, CO2 equivalent into the atmosphere that would speed things up so dramatically that, there's, at that point, it's survival mode. There's no mitigating it. There's no stopping it. So, yeah, that literally would alter life on the entire planet in a matter of minutes. And that's a very real possibility, and that's in a peer-reviewed, scientifically published study and has been for years now.
Dar, tell me about your book. I didn't know you were writing a book on climate change. When's it coming out, and what's the title, or are you not yet there?
It's called The End of Ice, and it's going to be published with the New Press this coming December, on December 19th. So, yeah, it's a book that really dives into a lot of these things that we've talked about, as well as then really how to kind of compose ourselves as humans. So the title is The End of Ice. The subtitle is Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption.
That's great. And be sure to remind us when it comes out. I want to get you on to promote it. And if a blurb for me helps at all, let me know if there's anything I can do. This is the issue. Obviously, there's a bunch of them, but this is the issue of our day. We're talking about the survival of life on Earth. Dar Jamail, independent journalist, author, staff reporter at truthout.org. You can tweet him at Dar, D-A-H-R, Jamail, J-A-M-A-I-L, at Dar Jamail. Thank you, Dar.
Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Pastor John in New Haven, Connecticut. Hey, Pastor John, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube. John? Oh, my. I think that, sometimes people try to put you on the air, and in that moment, they disconnect themselves. But anyhow, Tom in Hudsonville, Michigan. Hey, Tom, you want to try it?
Hi, yes, and I'm connected. I have some questions. Why can't Democratic candidates and elected Democrats have a focus like Teddy Roosevelt had? And why don't Democratic candidates and elected Democrats focus on issues like Bernie Sanders, Robert Reich, and the Thom Hartmans of the world? And they always sound like they're solving the problem du jour. There are no taglines that define us as Democrats, and I'm upset. I'm upset. We can't focus on a living wage or progressive corporate and individual tax rate, Kennedy-like to-the-moon passion for renewable energy sources. I'm working for Democrats, but they sound so weak, Tom. I'm upset.
Yeah, the problem we have, Tom, is that there are, for the major television networks, and particularly the news networks, CNN and MSNBC, there are acceptable Democrats and unacceptable Democrats. And the acceptable Democrats that they will put on, and typically they don't even use elected. They'll typically only put elected Democrats on if they want to trash Donald Trump or talk about Russia. And the Democratic consultants that they put on are, the Harold Ford Jr. variety. They are the Democratic Leadership Council, the old DLC and now the Third Way. They're the Democrats who believe that the Democratic Party should be in bed with big corporations, that's what elected Bill Clinton president in '92, and we can do it again, by God. And those are the Democrats that you will see on TV, tragically. And they sound like spineless, mealy-mouthed corporate shills, which is what they are. And, genuine progressives, there's almost 100 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And these guys are out there speaking bluntly, as Mark Pocan did for an hour on this program today, speaking clearly, speaking, passionately about these issues. And they're doing it literally on a daily basis, everywhere, all across the country. Somewhere there are progressive groups. So there are, in many of these town halls, hundreds or even thousands of people are showing up. It gets absolutely no coverage in the corporate media. And that's why, Tom, it seems like the Democrats are being wishy-washy Frankly, I think it's because the media does not want to be regulated. I think it's because the media does, these are giant multinational corporations. They don't want to see their taxes go up. Their CEOs don't want their taxes to go up. Most of the people on TV are making multiple millions of dollars a year, simply because they're on these networks and have become TV stars essentially. And they don't want to see their taxes go up. So I don't think this is a problem with the Democratic Party, Tom. I think that what you're describing, your experience, which I absolutely understand, is the consequence of our media capture by corporate America, in my opinion.
Hey, Tom, that fairness doctrine is being taken advantages by the guys like Tucker Carlson, who always, like you said, they get the weak people online.
Yep. Yeah, and it's just like on Fox, the only acceptable Democrats, are the weak Democrats by and large. I mean, I've been on Fox twice this year, but in a whole year, I'm not going to be one of the regular Democrats because I don't let people walk all over me. Tom, thanks a lot for the call. I appreciate it. It's good to hear from you. We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
With you, a number of things I wanted to bring to your attention, and a couple of short riffs here to take us to the bottom of the hour, and then right after the bottom of the hour, I will be picking up your phone calls, and of course we'll have talk radio news or talk media news at 10 minutes before the hour, and then the whole third hour today, I'm keeping open for conversation with you about this larger question that I think is emerging on the world stage, which is exactly why is Donald Trump behaving the way he is? And we'll get into that more in the third hour. But let me just share a couple of these things. I mentioned this very briefly to Congressman Pocan earlier today. And I think it's pretty important. Judge Brett Kavanaugh, 2 years ago, went out of his way. He was talking to a conservative group. Went out of his way to say he wants to knock down the Supreme Court ruling that supports the existence of an independent special counsel who can investigate the White House. He wants to end that. And this was 2 years ago that he wanted to end that. And I believe, as I said, when Trump was going through his 5 top picks and his 6 top picks and his 20 top picks, and I went through that list, and I told you on this program several days in a row he was going to pick Brett Kavanaugh, because Brett Kavanaugh was the one guy who had said that the president should be able to fire the special counsel, and that if he was on the Supreme, he didn't say explicitly that if he was on the Supreme Court he would support the president firing the special counsel, but any idiot could infer that. And, I certainly fall into that qualification, so that was easy for me to figure out. I mean, this isn't rocket science, right? This is from a piece by Manu Raju, CNN's senior congressional correspondent. It was forwarded to me by Chuck Schumer's office, but it's a CNN piece from July 18, the headline, Trump Supreme Court pick, I would put the nail in ruling upholding independent counsel. And here's the exact quote from the article. Asked at an American Enterprise Institute event. The American Enterprise, by the way, is one of these big corporate front groups, right-wing think tanks they represent themselves as. They and their buddies are now contributing a lot of money to NPR, and so they're on NPR all the time. But this is just another one of these libertarian Koch-type front organizations for the hard right, asked at an and for the corporate America, asked at an American Enterprise Institute event in March of 2016 if he could think of a case that deserved, a Supreme Court case that deserved to be overturned. Kavanaugh said yes. Asked if he could specify a case, Kavanaugh first responded no, prompting laughter from the audience, but then he volunteered this. Actually, Kavanaugh said, I'm going to say one. Morrison v. Olson. It's been effectively overruled, but I would put the final nail in it. Now, Morrison v. Olson is the decision, the Supreme Court decision, that said that the special counsel that was investigating Bill Clinton, Ken Starr, could continue his work. And Brett Kavanaugh says he wants to end that. The Koch brothers just committed publicly $1 million to getting Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. So expect to see a lot of these ads coming down the road. I just want to point an article out to you, by the way, in the New Republic. It's titled Trump's Russian Laundromat. And it's basically about going all the way back to 1984, how Trump was basically in the money laundering business for corrupt oligarchs, not uniquely Russians, but certainly a lot of them. And, you know, which brings us back to my question / hypothesis. Why is Trump behaving the way he is? Is he doing it simply because he desperately needs the money of the Russian oligarchs who have been supporting and propping him up all these years, and he needs his basic business model as a criminal business model? This guy is, you know, running a RICO operation, a money laundering operation. Is it that? Or is it that he has, you know, he's being blackmailed somehow? Or that he's just decided, hey, you know, strongman governments work better than democracies? We'll discuss that in the next hour, but we'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Well, and in fact, we can discuss that now, although I want to dig in at the top of the next hour really deeply into Trump's road to American martial law. Neil Howe. And this book was published, I believe, in the late 90s, just FYI. 1998. America feels like it's unraveling. Though we live in an era of relative peace and comfort, we have settled into a mood of pessimism about the long-term future, fearful that our superpower nation is somehow rotting from within. Neither an epic victory nor over communism nor an extended upswing of the business cycle can buoy our public spirit. The Cold War and the New Deal struggles are plainly over, but we are of no mind to bask in their successes. The America of today feels worse in its fundamentals than the one many of us remember from our youth, a society presided over by those of supposedly lesser consciousness. Wherever we look, from L.A. to D.C., from Oklahoma City to Sun City, we see paths to a foreboding future. We yearn for civic character, but satisfy ourselves with symbolic gestures and circuses. We perceive no greatness in our leaders, a new meanness in ourselves. Small wonder that each new election brings a new jolt, its aftermath, a new disappointment. I'd add this was at the height of the Newt Gingrich and impeachment and all that kind of craziness. Not long ago, America, which is the predecessor, has really set up Donald Trump. Not long ago, America was more than the sum of its parts. Now it is less. Around World War II, we were proud as a people, but modest as individuals. Fewer than 2 people in 10 said yes when asked, are you a very important person? Today, more than 6 in 10 say yes. Where we once thought ourselves collectively strong, we now regard ourselves as individually entitled. Yet even while we exalt our own personal growth, we realize that millions of self-actualized persons don't add up to an actualized society. Popular trust in virtually every American institution, from business and governments to churches and newspapers, keeps falling to new lows. Public debts soar, the middle class shrinks, welfare dependencies deepen, and cultural arguments worsen by the year. We now have the highest incarceration rate and the lowest eligible voter participation rate of any major democracy in the world. Statistics inform us that many adverse trends, crime, divorce, abortion, scholastic aptitudes, may have bottomed out, but we're not reassured. Optimism still attaches to self, but no longer to family or community. This is the consequence of Reaganism. Most Americans express more hope for their own prospects than for their children's or the nation's. Parents widely fear that the American dream, which was there solidly for their parents and still there barely for them, will not be there for their kids. Young householders are reaching their mid-30s, never having known a time when America seemed to be on the right track. Middle-aged people look at their thin savings accounts and slim to none pensions, scoff at an illusory Social Security trust fund, and try not to dwell on what a burden their old age could become. Seniors separate into their own leisure world, recoiling at the lost virtue of youth while trying not to think about the future. We perceive our civic challenge as some vast, insoluble Rubik's Cube. Behind each problem lies another problem that must be solved first, and behind that lies another and another ad infinitum. To fix crime, we have to fix the family, but before we do that, we have to fix welfare, and that means fixing our budget, and that means fixing our civic spirit, but we can't do that without fixing moral standards, and that means fixing our schools and churches, and that means fixing the inner cities, and that's impossible unless we fix crime. There's no fulcrum upon which to rest a policy lever. People of all ages sense that something huge will have to sweep across America before the gloom can be lifted. But that's an awareness we suppress. As a nation, we're in deep denial. While we grope for answers, we wonder if analysis may be crowding out our intuition. The reward of the historian is to locate patterns that recur over time and to discover the natural rhythms of social experience. In fact, at the core of modern history lies this remarkable pattern. Over the past 5 centuries, Anglo-American society has entered a new era, a new turning, every 2 decades or so. At the start of each turning, people change how they feel about themselves, the culture, the nation, and the future. Turnings come in cycles of 4. Each cycle spans the length of a long human life, roughly 80 to 100 years, a unit of time the ancients called seculum. Together, the 4 turnings of the seculum comprise history's seasonal rhythm of growth, maturation, entropy, and destruction. The first turning is a high, an upbeat era of strengthening institutions and weakening individualism, where a new civic order implants and the old values regime decays. The second turning is an awakening, a passionate era of spiritual upheaval when the civic order comes under attack from a new values regime. The third turning is an unraveling, a downcast era of strengthening individualism and weakening institutions when the old civic order decays and the new values regime implants. And the fourth turning is a crisis, a decisive era of secular upheaval when the values regime propels the replacement of the old civic order with a new one. Each turning comes with its own identifiable mood. Always these mood shifts catch people by surprise. In the current seculum, the first turning was the American high of the Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy presidencies. As World War II wound down, no one predicted that America would soon become so confident and institutionally muscular, yet so conformist and spiritually complacent. But that's what's happened. The second turning was the consciousness revolution, stretching from the campus revolts of the mid-60s to the tax revolts of the early 80s. Before John Kennedy was assassinated, no one predicted that America was about to enter an era of personal liberation and cross a cultural divide that would separate anything thought or said after from anything thought or said before. But that's what happened. The third turning has been the culture wars, an era that began with Reagan's mid-1980s Morning in America and is due to expire around the middle of the decade, 8 or 10 years from now. Amid the glitz of the early Reagan years, no one predicted that the nation was entering an era of national drift.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Ed in Miami, Florida. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm interested in the domestic emoluments clause of the U.S. Constitution as far as public servants.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that a movement, public movement, that the people themselves could impact that is to say, if a movement would come about, would it impact the possibility of money being restricted in such a way that campaign financing could be impacted?
Well, the provision of the Constitution is there, and there are also specific anti-corruption laws that are there, all of which could be turned against the Trump crime family and Donald Trump himself. And the problem is that I don't see any action out of the Justice Department in that direction, which is one of the 2 bodies that could initiate an investigation, although there may well be that going on in the background, and that may well even be part of what Robert Mueller is looking into. We just don't know. But because obviously Jeff Sessions is not going to be going after Donald Trump. and he's the head of the Justice Department indirectly as the secretary. But then there's also Congress. Congress has the ability to do this kind of investigation, and Congress has the power of subpoena. And so Paul Ryan could be authorizing investigations into this. I mean, the Republicans certainly know how to do this. They subpoenaed Hillary Clinton over Benghazi. They spent years to 3, 4 years, 5 years, holding congressional hearings, multiple millions of dollars, not one single, even an indictment, much less a conviction for any kind of crime or even any kind of inappropriate behavior of anybody around Benghazi or any of the other many things, these phony freakouts that they did during the Obama era. So the Republicans certainly know how to do this, but they are refusing to do this, and therein lies the rub. I think that's really the problem. Thanks a lot for the call. Pastor John in New Haven, Connecticut. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey there. It's so wonderful to finally be able to talk to you. It's my very first time calling, but I've been listening for a long time. Thank you for all that you do.
Sure.
Listen, we need to all become political scientists. That means that each of us in the audience, we need to find out the official voter count of every Republican, Democrat, and Independent for each state in the Union, county, and parish. We got to do that. Listen, before the Russians got involved, you had Section 5 of the Civil Rights Voting Rights Act gutted. You had voter suppression going on. We need to know how many people are voting in each state who are registered. That's number one. Yep. 2, we need to get a paper trail of all ballots. 3, you got to get your IDs now. 4, don't forget that Reverend Barber said that 868 polling places were displaced in 2016. Next, we need a Southern strategy that says bring blacks and whites all together. And the Democrats need some talking points. When it comes to Peter Strzok, you need to say, listen, if he had gone to the New York Times and told about the Russian investigation of Trump, he would not be president. We need to say, thank a Democrat if you have Medicaid, Medicare. Thank a Democrat if you have Social Security. Thank a Democrat if you have student grants. And we need to have, finally, Tom, I think, a unity campaign because you got the Young Turks Justice Leagues. You got all these people going out there running against one another. When it's all done, we have to all vote Democratic in order to bring about change in the country.
Yeah,
what do you think about that?
I think that's a great rant, John, and good on you for doing it. And I would add, by the way, maybe you didn't catch this, James Comey, who has been a Republican all his life, who served as the number 2 guy in the Department of Justice under John Ashcroft in the George W. Bush administration. James Comey has just tweeted, this was yesterday, I believe, that the Republican Party, I don't recall his exact words, but this is, I read the tweet, so my recollection of what he said was essentially that the Republicans are not going to stand up to Trump, that our republic is in danger, and that if you care about your nation, vote Democratic in November. This is James Comey, a lifelong Republican. So I think that your rant, thank you for that, John, was spot on. And these are very, very real issues that we're dealing with. Van in Lewis Center, Missouri. Hey, Van, what's up?
It's Lewis Center, Ohio.
Ohio, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Listen, I was going to talk about slogans and stuff, but you know what? She said everything. So what I want to talk about is that when you're talking about Trump and you made a list, I think I check off every list of him being, I think it goes back to his father. His father molded him into the person that he is. And I think that he doesn't have to worry about the Russians because the Russians consider him one of them. Mm-hmm. He's more of them than he is of us. So I think his main problem is that he's worried about the investigation here. I don't think he, forget about the Russians and stuff. They know he's their guy. So he's not going to squill on them. They're not going to squill on him. They don't care. He's that close to them. So I believe it's the investigation that's going on now. Yeah. So, what do you think?
I don't know. I think, the probability, I would say probably the 75, in my mind, the 75% probability is that Donald Trump, without money from Russian billionaires, And Vladimir Putin has, put Russian billionaires in prison. He has taken their money away when they don't behave the way he likes. And so, if he were to say to the Russian billionaires, pull the plug on Trump, that Donald Trump would be living in a cardboard box on Skid Row, and his daughter would have to start manufacturing products in a little factory in New Jersey, and his sons would have to get real jobs. And his son-in-law, probably, the fallout from that would be, China would pull back that $1 billion that they put into the Trump Hotel in Indonesia, and they would pull back those trademarks, those 14 trademarks that they gave Ivanka that are going to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to her, and that even the Sultan of Oman, I believe it is, who is in the process of giving Jared Kushner $1 billion to refinance 666 Fifth Avenue, may think, hey, this is a bad bet. This crime family is going to go down, and I think that's the 75% probability is that it's really all about the money. That Trump has been faking it his entire life. He's never been as rich as he says he is. He keeps losing money. He keeps having failing businesses. He's actually a lousy businessman and a lousy negotiator, to the point that in 2014, his son Eric told a reporter. It was on a golf course. I don't think he realized he was on the record, but he told a reporter that they could no longer borrow money from U.S. banks because of all the bankruptcies and business failures that Trump had had. And as a consequence of that, they were getting their money from Russia. And I don't think he meant the Russian government. I think he meant the Russian oligarchs. But you can't disentangle the two at many levels. So that's 75%. Then there's this, 10% possibility that Trump is actually dancing to the tune of Russia, for some reason that we don't know. And I don't believe that the reason is the PP tape, because, I think that would actually strengthen him with his base, and I think he knows it. He knows that if it came out that he had hired 2 white Russian prostitutes to pee on a bed that had been slept in by America's first black president, his support among his base would actually go up. Or at least a large chunk of his base. So I don't think he's worried about the PP tape coming out. In fact, he may even want it to come out. But I think, there's a possibility that there's something there that is being held over him. That's a 10% chance. And then the remaining 15% chance, to round it out to 100% here, is that I think that Donald Trump looks at governing as he doesn't understand governing. He doesn't understand the role of governments. He doesn't understand why governments are formed. He doesn't understand the fundamental differences between governments and business. And he thinks governments should be run like businesses. They should be run for a profit. They should be run for gain. It should be zero sum. We win, you lose, that kind of thing. And in that context, he admires strongman governments where you've got a leader who can basically has the power, both legally and the power of personality, to bend the legislative and judicial branches to their will, which is essentially what Trump has done with the Republican Party, with the Republicans in the House and Senate. But it's what Viktor Orban has done in Hungary. In fact, they just rewrote their constitution to give him much more power. It's what I don't remember the name of the guy who just became the president of Poland, but it's what he's doing in Poland. It's what Erdogan has done in Turkey now, particularly since the military coup and the state of emergency. And it is, clearly this is what Vladimir Putin did in the first few years of his presidency. In each country, it plays out in its own unique way, to the character of that country. It's what what's his name is doing in the Philippines, Duterte. It's what the president of Indonesia is doing, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name either. But in each one of these, where Trump is, by the way, building a hotel, that's the hotel that the Chinese just loaned them $1 billion, and 4 days later, Trump says, "Oh yeah, you got a company selling phones to spy on Americans. You can bring them back into the United States." That just happened last week, right? It's not even being covered, and so I think that there's also that possibility too. That the 15% possibility that he actually thinks that the best thing for our country is to turn into something like Russia or Hungary or Turkey, and he wants to be the guy who is the Putin or the Orban or the Erdogan. So what do you think?
Well, you know what, Tom? Real quick, I don't think he cares about our country. He'll turn the country in for himself. That's what he wants.
Yeah. So you know, what you're pitching is my 75% scenario. I think you're probably right.
I believe it.
I think you're probably right. But those are my three possibilities. I don't know if anybody has more to add. Feel free to give us a shout. We're going to talk. Thank you, Van. Good to hear from you. We're going to talk with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes, and then at the top of the next hour, I got to tell you about Roger Cohen's new piece in the New York Times, Trump's Road to American Martial Law.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Is Donald Trump setting us up for a soft dictatorship, or maybe are we already there? We'll discuss that at the top of the hour. And welcome back. Jack in Kirkland, Illinois. Hey, Jack, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Well, if you believe that the White House is inhabited by a 6-foot-tall pile of detestable putridity, fly your flag upside down. It's a sign of national distress, and that you can drive
Jack,
up and down the road.
If I may, because people are listening, and I want to encourage them not to take your advice, and here's why. We went through this during the demonstrations against the Iraq War, and I was on the air in 2003, 2004, when you know, we were very, very upset about George Bush. He lied us into this war, all this kind of stuff, and some people did that. And if a police, in many, it varies from city to city, but in many, and state to state, but many police departments, if they see an upside down flag at a window, they will assume that that literally is a distress call, and you may find your front door being kicked in. You know, that is a way of you know, warning that there's danger here in the house, and I don't think most people would take it as a political statement. I think that you would draw ire from you know, hard right crazies who would see it as you're being anti-patriotic because they don't, you know, they're not well informed enough to realize the history of you know, the distress call, and you may put yourself at some sort of not necessarily a legal peril, but a peril in a very practical sense of you know, having the police come in and say you know, what's your problem? So may I recalibrate you slightly, Jack, please?
Tom, my flag has been upside down for over 8 months, 9 months, a long time.
Wow.
And
is this in front of your home in Illinois?
In front of my home in Illinois. It's only about 20 feet away from the edge of the road.
Wow. So what kind of feedback have you gotten?
Well, my son-in-law wondered why it was upside down, and then he, when I told him, he said, "Are you going to take it down?" And I said, "No, it's up there for a very good reason, and it's going to stay that way until there's something changed."
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I think when Bush was president, there was probably much broader support for him among police departments, although there are some police departments in this country where they love to knock particularly people of color upside the head, and you could, you know, it may still be a danger, maybe not, Jack, but that's fascinating that you've been doing that. Is Kirkland, I'm not familiar with the town where you live, is this a small town?
Oh, yes, only 2,000 people.
So I'm guessing you know your neighbors. Have you heard from them? You haven't heard from them? Nobody's said anything to you in the grocery store or whatever?
Just not in the grocery store and not at church. One lady spoke to my wife one time, and that was it.
Huh. Interesting. It's, huh. Well, you know, I would just advise people to be conscious of it. You know, yours is on a flagpole in your front yard, right?
It's on a flagpole that's screwed to a tree that's right at the top of the ditch.
Because the guy who called me and told me that his house got broken into by the police had taped it in his front window. And so it was inside the house facing out. And their argument was, you know, we thought maybe somebody was, you know, it was a domestic abuse situation or somebody was being held captive. You know, who knows? I don't know. Jack, thank you for the call, and thanks for raising a very provocative possibility. I appreciate the call. We'll be right back with Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News right after this. Stick around. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
With Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen's new book. Hey, Ellen.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Okay, it's really interesting. The president just had before he left for joint with Base Andrews to pay his respects to the Secret Service agent that died while actually on duty. And the president had one of his meetings, with all of his...
cabinet meetings?
What?
Was it his cabinet meeting?
Yes, cabinet. Thank you so much. I'm having a senior moment. Okay. So, and basically he said that nobody had been tougher on Russia than him. No president had been. And he doesn't think that Russia is a threat to the United States. Well, that actually threw Dan Coates, who used to be a senator, now a security advisor, under the bus. Because Dan Coates does not believe that. He thinks Russia is still a problem.
Right. And my understanding is that basically what he was asked is, do you think that is Russia not just still a threat to the United States, in quotes, but specifically is the Russian threat, the threat of Russian involvement in our elections still a threat? And Donald Trump said no. And there's some discussion, at least on some right-wing websites, about whether he actually said no or not. But that's which is I find interesting. But that Donald Trump said no, and that was the context. Do I have that right?
Right, you absolutely have it right. That's what happened at the cabinet meeting.
Yeah.
Right before they ushered the press in, and then actually they kept them there quite a long time. So also, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright went after Donald Trump today on his joint conference. He said it's his press conference that he had with the Russian president on Monday. He said it's the gift that keeps giving to Putin. And then, interestingly enough, Panetta, not Donald Trump, Panetta, who used to be the CIA director, said that the way Trump behaves, there's a clear signal that the Russians have something on him. I thought that was really interesting for Leon Panetta to come out and say.
Yeah. You know, Ellen, we're discussing this. In fact, we're going to get into a longer discussion of this next hour on the program. My theory, and I'd love to hear your take on this because you've been in Washington years and years and you know many of these people. My theory is that there's a 75% chance that Donald Trump is just scared to death about his finances, that he literally would not be in business any longer after his last bankruptcy and the American bank stopped lending to him if it wasn't for money from Russian billionaires and other corrupt billionaires around the world. But you know, so much of it coming from Russia that if he were to upset them, that he would be living on Skid Row in a cardboard box and his kids would have to get real jobs. That's my 75% chance.
Well, I don't know that he would be living on Skid Row, but his kids would have to get real jobs instead of making $80 million, that's with an M, dollars last year,
right.
Which is one of his kids made, and Ivanka, I believe, and her husband, Jared Kushner.
Yeah, 84
and
million.
So, yes, I actually, I don't know.
So that's
I only
one.
know really
but
more
let me lay out the other two for you. My 15% scenario is that he looks at governments like when he went to Saudi Arabia, and Wilbur Ross was so amazed that nobody was protesting in the streets. When Turkey, he's got a hotel and he loves Erdogan. Erdogan was the guy he was walking around with at NATO. That when he looks at these, Putin, when he looks at these strongman governments, this is my 15% chance probability. He thinks that's how America would actually work best, and so he's trying to reinvent America, the image of these strongman governments. And then my 10% chance is that he's actually being blackmailed by Russia, or he's been a Russian agent for years and years, or he's, he has some kind of a deep relationship that has nothing to do with money. I think that's unlikely, and I don't think the PP tapes, I don't think he even cares about it.
Too.
I think if the PP tapes came out of his hiring white Russian hookers to pee on the bed that was slept on by the first black American president, his base would actually be happy. So what do you think?
Well, I think actually that, and I know this more from New York finances than I do from Washington insider stuff, is that I think that his financial situation is really guiding a lot of this.
Yeah.
That I do absolutely think, there's no question about it.
I know you have a very close personal relationship with several New York billionaire property developers. Is that widely known that Trump has been in trouble for a long time?
Well, I think, look, he has been bailed out, as you said, by many times by the banks because they don't want to see his properties go down. And his bailing out allows him to, the guy that wrote the book, Art of the Deal with him, does not have a lot of respect for him.
Yeah. Yeah, well, to say the very least. Okay, Ellen, we still have a minute. What else is in the news?
Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of other things going on. The 12 people who were trapped in a cave in Thailand were released from the hospital at early this morning, our time. They held a news conference. They were dressed in their athletic outfits. And they basically have said that they lived on drinking water to fill their belly, and that they found a way after their drinking water was absolutely coming down from the top of the cave. So that's what they said today. Also, it looks like Common Cause went after the politicals because they said that the Treasury Department wants to scrap rules that basically got any disclosure requirement about nonprofits giving to political campaigns. Give me a break.
Yeah, so this would help the Koch brothers and the NRA big time.
Oh, for sure. And big time.
Yeah. Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. And in the next hour, we're going to talk about what Donald Trump is up to, what plans he might have for America, where this goes, and why. Stick around. It's coming up on the top of the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair chair, office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by SuperBeets. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM. Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's collected poems. This is the 1841 edition, but there's modern ones available too. It's the same poems. I want to start with a Psalm of Life, one of my favorites, one that I learned as a kid. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow finds us further than today. Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb, driven cattle. Be a hero in the strife. Lives of, I trust no future, however present. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act within the living present, heart within and God o'erhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footsteps in the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another sailing o'er life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing, will take heart again. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing. Learn to labor and to wait. And the book opens with Voices of the Night, another of his brilliant poems. This is from the prelude. Pleasant it was when woods were green and winds were soft and low, to lie amid some sylvan scene where the long drooping boughs between, shadows dark and sunlight sheen, alternate come and go. Or where the denser grove receives no sunlight from above, but the dark foliage interweaves in one unbroken roof of leaves, underneath whose sloping eaves the shadows hardly move. Beneath some patriarchal tree I lay upon the ground. His hoary arms uplifted he, and all the broad leaves over me clapped their little hands in glee with one continuous sound. A slumberous sound, a sound that brings the feelings of a dream, as of innumerable wings, as when a bell no longer swings. Faint the hollow murmur rings, o'er meadow, lake, and stream. And dreams of that which cannot die, bright visions come to me, as lapped in thought I used to lie and gaze into the summer sky where the sailing clouds went by like ships upon the sea. Dreams that the soul of youth engage, ere fancy has been quelled. Old legends of the monkish age, traditions of the saint and sage, tales that have the rhyme of age, and chronicles of eld. And loving still these quaint old themes, even in the city's throng, I feel the freshness of the streams that, crossed by glades and sunny gleams, water the green land of dreams, the holy land of song. Therefore at Pentecost, which brings the spring clothed like a bride, when nestling buds unfold their wings and bishops' caps have golden rings, musing upon many things, I sought the woodlands wide. The green trees whispered low and mild. It was a sound of joy. They were my playmates when a child, and rocked me in their arms so wild, but they looked at me and smiled as if I were a boy. And ever whispered, mild and low, come be a child once more, and waved their long arms to and fro, and beckoned solemnly and slow, oh, I could not choose but go into the woodlands hoar, into the blithe and breathing air, into the solemn wood, solemn and silent everywhere. Nature with folded hands seemed there, kneeling at her evening prayer. Like one in prayer, I stood. Before me rose an avenue of tall and sombrous pines. Abroad their fan-like branches grew, and where the sunlight darted through, spread a vapor soft and blue in long and sloping lines. And falling on my weary brain like a fast-falling shower, the dreams of youth come back again, low lispings of the summer rain dropping in the ripening grain, once upon the flower. Visions of childhood, stay, oh stay, ye were so sweet and wild, and distant voices seemed to say, it cannot be, they pass away, other themes demand the day. demand the lay, excuse me, thy lay, thou art no more a child. The land of song within thee lies, watered by living springs. The lids of Fanny's sleepless eyes are grates into that paradise. Holy thoughts like stars arise, its clouds are angels' wings. Learn that henceforth thy song shall be not mountains capped with snow, no forests surrounding like the sea, nor rivers flowing ceaselessly where the woodlands bend to see the bending heavens below. There is a forest where the din of iron branches sounds, a mighty river roars between, and whoever looks therein sees the heavens all black with sin, sees not its depths nor bounds. Look then into thine heart and write, yes, into life's dream, a deep stream. Longfellow.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So let me welcome back, by the way. This is your media support group for We the People, and let's have this conversation. I find this absolutely fascinating stuff. And my three scenarios, and if you want to add to them, and Arthur, I'd like you to also make sure that all of our callers are on this topic of this hour. Why is Donald Trump behaving the way he is relative to Russia and relative to other autocratic regimes around the world? Why? Roger Cohen wrote a piece in this morning's New York Times. It's titled Trump's Road to American Martial Law. And he's suggesting my 15% scenario as a possibility, which is that Donald Trump looks at the way that Erdogan is running Turkey, or looks at the way that Vladimir Putin is running Russia, or looks at the way that President Xi is running China, or looks at the way that Duterte is running the Philippines, and says to himself, or the Prince Salman in Saudi Arabia, or the autocrats in the rest of the Middle East, he looks at these people and he says, that's the way a government should be run. It shouldn't be run with a whole bunch of people running around having different opinions and having big arguments and fighting with each other of what's right and what's wrong, and separation of power and checks and balances, and all that stuff is silly. You can't get anything done in the world that way. You want to get things done, if you want to be efficient, if you want to grow as rapidly as China has, if you want to lock down and not have dissent like Saudi Arabia doesn't, if you want to get some control over your people and keep them in line, like Erdogan has done in Turkey. He's put more than 35,000 people in prison. Erdogan in Turkey has, and many of them simply journalists or dissidents. That Donald Trump thinks that if you want to do that you basically have to run the country the way these guys are running their countries. In fact, this would be even, what Erdogan has done is arguably even more than what Putin has done. I mean, Vladimir Putin has not declared martial law in Russia. But some of these other countries, that's absolutely happening. And in some of them, there's not even a mechanism for elections. Saudi Arabia, for example. So Trump is even looking to far more extreme examples than Putin. And so here we get to Roger Cohen's column in today's New York Times, and he's quoting Norm Ornstein, who's a solid guy and a good analyst, shall we say, of governments and how government works and what's happening in the United States. And he ends his article where first of all it's like a bill of impeachment, almost a list of all the things that Trump has done, and he keeps saying, yet he's not finished, yet he's not done, he still has, the president is not done. And then he said, soon there may be indictments from Robert Mueller, the special counsel, of high officials against high officials or members of Trump's family. What then? Ornstein's nightmare scenario is this: Trump fires Mueller, Trump pardons himself and everyone else, and I would add, all the members of the Trump crime family and Paul Manafort and the whole bit, pardons himself and everyone else, and then Trump signals to his followers, to his base, to go into the streets. And keep in mind, these people are proudly armed. And after the inevitable bloodshed, I'm reading from one of the lead op-eds in today's New York Times. I'll just let me read it straight up, because I've been doing commentary on this, as I've been reading it. So let me just read straight up what Roger Cohen wrote. Soon there may be indictments from Robert Mueller, the special counsel, of high officials of members of Trump's family. What then? Ornstein's nightmare scenario? Trump fires Mueller, pardons himself and everyone else, sends his followers into the street, and after the inevitable bloodshed, declares martial law. Now, if he declares martial law, I believe under the laws passed after 9/11, that he has the ability to even suspend Congress. Now, I may be wrong on that. I need to fact check it. I need to find out exactly what the powers of the president become if he declares martial law, what the mechanism is for him to declare martial law. We all have some learning to do on this, and it needs to become part of our conversation. But that's what Roger Cohen is laying out in today's New York Times, right up on the front page. Secondly, you've got the so-called coalition, and this is from the New York Times, piece by Catherine Stewart. The title is "What Was Maria Butina?" She is the 29-year-old Russian agent who is now in jail in the United States. The latest that she's been accused of is offering sex to somebody to infiltrate or to insinuate herself into a special interest group, it's referred to as. So it's probably one of these right-wing think tanks. And this is all going into the Republican Party, which has been so, close to these guys. And she was at the National Prayer Breakfast. And Jeff Charlotte, and is Jeff going to be on the program tomorrow? Yeah, we're going to have Jeff on the program tomorrow, so we'll get into this in some more detail with him. But he said, the family is the group that puts on the National Prayer Breakfast. And he said it's not just the breakfast. The family organizes a week of de facto lobbying events. Maria Butina used them to maximize impact. He writes that there is a bond, or Catherine Stewart writes in the New York Times today, the bond between Americans' Christian nationalists and the Russian government goes back a long way. And then here's where it gets real interesting. Paul Weyrich, our old friend Paul Weyrich, right? You will recall Paul Weyrich is the guy who in 1980 was helping run the Reagan campaign after he had helped set up the Heritage Foundation. And he was reaching out to fundamentalist Christians to get them active in voter suppression against Democrats. You'll recall in the 60s, the way that William Rehnquist, who ended up the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the way he made his chops in Republican Party politics in Phoenix, Arizona in the 60s was he was a big, tall bear of a man. He was about 6'2", 6'3", and weighed a lot. I mean, he was just built like a football player. And William Rehnquist, who was also a lawyer, obviously, would stand outside these polling places in Native American communities and Hispanic communities and challenge voters and intimidate them into getting out of the line to vote. So this is the genesis of this, and here I'm going to play Paul Weyrich's audio out of my computer here, and this is what Paul Weyrich had to say to a group of Christians, and then I'll read to you what the New York Times is reporting today about Paul Weyrich and the involvement of the Republican Party with the Russians. Here it is.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Our leverage in the elections goes up as the voting populace goes down. And now you've got Chris Kobach and Mike Pence and Donald Trump all tied up into this thing. So, to the New York Times today, again, this piece by Catherine Stewart. What was Maria Butina doing at the National Prayer Breakfast? Catherine writes, Paul Weyrich belongs on any shortlist of the individuals who created the religious right as we know it today. He was a central figure in the founding of numerous conservative organizations, including the Heritage Foundation, ALEC, the Moral Majority, and the Council for National Policy. He was one of the first strategists in the 1970s who first conceived of outreach to evangelical churches in order to recruit activists to socially conservative causes. He was also among the first to grasp the potential for an alliance with religious conservatives in Russia and Eastern Europe. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Mr. Weyrich made dozens of trips to Russia, eventually becoming a strong supporter of closer relations. By the time of his death in 2008, Mr. Weyrich was writing and speaking frequently in defense of Russia and facilitating visits between American conservatives and Russian political leaders. This is the guy who said this.
Leverage in the election, as a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Then they quote Brian Fisher. Brian Fisher used to come on this program and debate me. It's been a couple of years since he's been willing to come on, but because I would regularly just kind of kick his butt. But Brian Fisher used to come on this program. He called Vladimir Putin, quote, a lion of Christianity. Franklin Graham, who won't come on this program, defended Putin, quoting from the New York Times, defended Putin for his efforts to, quote, protect his nation's children from the damaging effects of any gay and lesbian agenda. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Mike Pence hailed Mr. Putin as, quote, we're quoting Mike Pence here, a stronger leader in his country than Barack Obama has been in this country. And of course, more than 50 Russians attended the most recent national prayer breakfast. Now, I think that's, Russia's a fairly conservative country. The Putin government is a very conservative government by social and business norms. And so it shouldn't be surprising that this alliance is happening, but it's worth noting. And then finally, my 75% scenario, which was that Trump is out of money and he desperately needs the money of Russian billionaires, that's why he's behaving the way he is. This was fascinating. It's in today's Washington Post. The headline, "It's just not wise. In past year, Trump's company repeatedly paid property taxes late." Is Trump running out of money? President Trump's company missed deadlines to pay property tax bills in 5 states over the past year, according to government reports and local officials. This spate of missed deadlines was out of character for the Trump Organization, which receives hundreds of property tax bills every year. Previously, records show it had a good record of paying them on time. But now they're not. So why is it that Donald Trump can no longer, or is no longer, paying his property taxes on time? Is it that his sons that he turned the company over to are just lousy businessmen and they don't know how to run it? This should be on autopilot, basically. You get the tax statement, it gets paid. It shouldn't even rise to the level of the CEO. Or is it that he's running out of cash? Maybe even the Russian oligarchs are backing away from him. Could this provoke a crisis where he declares a national emergency?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And these are the questions of our day. And I'll take them up with you after this break. And welcome back. Sansi in San Rafael, California. Sansi, you are on the air. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, Tom. You said my name perfectly, too.
Good. Thank you.
I am just I got to try to stabilize here because what you just read and all that is very unnerving. But I was calling about Trump and Putin aligning themselves. And I've been so afraid of this for almost a year now because I keep hearing little things like Trump says, I don't have time for your question. We got a world to run here.
Right.
And he's talking about Putin and Xi.
And not just them. I mean, this whole bunch of them.
The whole constellation.
What we have is this emerging, Steve Bannon has been pushing this process, this emerging coalition of autocratic governments that Donald Trump wants to be a part of.
That's what he's doing out over there in Europe. That's what he's been doing since he left the White House. But I've seen him interviewed over there in Italy.
Yep.
And he's just disgusting, okay? He's just disgusting.
But he's having a good time with the Italian fascists.
Can I ask you one question, and then I'll take my answer off the air?
Sure.
Okay, so I don't tell many people that I'm worried about the coup here in America because that sounds so absurd. So I sort of live with it myself. But what do you think? What do you think about the possible? Is it 10%? Is it the 15%? Or is it's not the 75%? If they really are getting together and planning, to just take over the government
I think they already have, Sunsi.
No, I'm
Sun Tzu?
talking about Putin. I mean, we'll all be speaking Russian, and then we'll all be.
Oh no! I don't think Vladimir Putin has any interest in running our country. He's got his hands full. And B, this is not an ideological thing. I mean, when it was the Soviet Union versus the United States,
right? No,
you
this
had
is money.
you had a political and economic philosophy, communism, versus democracy and free market capitalism. So you had a clash of ideologies. That's no longer the case. The ideologies that are represented by Putin's Russia are, not that different, broadly speaking, from the hard right in the United States. They believe in hierarchy, they believe in patriarchy, they believe in authoritarianism, and so it's not a clash of ideals. So Russia doesn't need to bring us to our knees to impose communism on us. They're not even trying to do that. I think it's more,
I just think we make a lot of money. We have a lot of money here, and Putin likes money, and Trump likes money, and the attraction would be money, not ideology.
Yeah, I think it's about the business interests, in both countries, and the businesses and the multinational corporations and all that kind of stuff. But I think also that Trump is just very fond of autocracy, of strongman governments.
Well, he has malignant narcissism, is what I call it. It's malignant.
Yeah.
There's nowhere inside of him that isn't completely narcissistic, is my view. But I just want to say one last thing, and I'll let you go. I was meant to get off the phone, but when Mitch McConnell denied a hearing to
Merrick Garland?
Merrick Garland?
Yeah.
My blood went cold. I thought, what? And I felt this ominous feeling, and Trump wasn't even on the horizon. So anyway,
I'm with
the
you.
GOP in D.C., they've got a lot to do with what's going on here, too.
Oh, yeah.
Mitch McConnell is a devil, too.
Yep, and I wouldn't call him a devil, but he's extremely destructive, he and Paul Ryan. I'm with you. Sansi, thank you very much for the call. We'll be back in just a moment with more of your calls right after this. It's coming up on 22 minutes past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And so what do you think is going on with Donald Trump? Why is he behaving the way he is? Stephen, listening on 9:10 a.m. in San Francisco. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind?
Tom, I agree with you 75%. It could tie into the 15% here now. Donald Trump loves more than anything himself, but another thing he loves is property. And I do believe that this could be, you could tie it into the 15% where this is his only way out.
Is turning America into an autocracy, yeah. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Now, I worked for a company here, and they had about over 300 buildings. Same thing happened. He couldn't borrow in the United States. He went to UBS, Credit Suisse, and guess what happened? They took every building except for 2.
Whoa.
It was a major, the guy actually had passed right after that, but it was the same exact thing. And I do agree with you to round them all up and charge them with the RICO Act, because this is very organized.
Yeah.
The Trump organization is an organization of criminal activity.
I think you're right, and this is where Michael Cohen may be the piece of the dam that falls apart that brings the flood down. Although, you know, who knows? I mean, I'm so amazed that Robert Mueller has been able to keep his entire investigation just absolutely airtight. Every single time he issues an indictment, we're all sitting around here going, "Oh my God," you know, just shocked. But I'm with you. Thank you, Stephen, for your opinion, and thanks for listening to AM 910 in San Francisco. Harsh, excuse me, in High Point, North Carolina. You're on the air.
How you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
My summation is that in less than 90 days, Donald Trump and all of those cards are going to go down in less than 90 days. The fear of him losing the power that he has now has got him acting overly crazy.
So you think the chances of Trump exploiting some sort of, you know, kind of, this is really a Kristallnacht scenario, you know, where the German people, the followers of Trump, but just civilians coming out of their houses, went out and smashed the windows of Jewish-owned stores all over Germany, and you know, in response to a call to action from kind of a Steve Bannon kind of figure, you know, in Germany at the time. It sounds to me like what you're saying, Harsh, is that you think that's where we're at, or we're on the edge of that right now?
The very, very edge.
Yeah.
And they know it. And the Republicans who are in Congress, they know it, because they know much more than we do insofar as critical things like things that can't be discussed with the public.
Yeah.
And insofar as him instituting martial law, impossible. We have too many veterans, which I am a veteran, and we have too many people in the military that would not go along with no crap like that. This country is the greatest country in the world, and ain't no one man or that little organization he got going to take it down. I guarantee it.
Yeah. I believe you're right at the end of the day, but I think that there could be a lot of bloodshed or a lot of political harm, damage to our republic in the middle, in the interim. Right. But we'll see. Harsh, thanks a lot for the call. Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. I appreciate it. We'll be back. Why is Trump doing what he's doing? Why is he not literally putting America first when that's what he campaigned on? Right? What's going on here? Why is Saudi Arabia more important to him than the United States, for example? Or Russia or any other country? We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
He's sucking up to Erdogan in Turkey. He's sucking up to bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. He's sucking up to Putin. What's going on here? Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, The True Story of the White Nation by Jace Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So I've laid out my 3 theories that Trump is desperately in need of cash, and he gets a lot of it from Russian oligarchs, number 1, and has been for probably decades, or certainly the last decade or so, since the last economic crisis or his last bankruptcy. Number 1, that's my 75% probability. Number 2, that Donald Trump doesn't believe in democracy, doesn't even understand democracy, and thinks that an autocratic, plutocratic government would be a more efficient way to govern the nation and would be a better way to go for the United States. And so he's just simply moving both the Republican Party and the United States in that direction, a direction that, a course that was set by Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, in the religious context, and then Tony Perkins in the social, and the anti-abortion people in the social context of, basically top-down, which is not to say that the entire anti-abortion movement is that way, but because there are many good people of goodwill in there. But my point that, these are the tools that these guys who advocate autocracy typically use. In fact, the book report that we recorded today was a book called How Fascism Works. And it's, well, I'm going to get into that tomorrow. I've got some just extraordinary details. So that's my second possibility. And my third possibility, which I only assign a 10% chance to, is that, Russia is somehow blackmailing Trump. I think that's the least likely, because he's not just sucking up to Russia. He's sucking up to China. He's sucking up to North Korea. He's sucking up to Turkey. He's sucking up to the Philippines. He's sucking up to Indonesia. Half those places he has Trump hotels. Probably the other half he wants to have Trump properties. And, they're all either are or are becoming autocratic regimes. And so those are my theories. If you have a fourth theory, I'd love to hear it. Or if you think that, one of these, your thoughts. Rob in Arlington, Virginia. Rob, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I tend to agree with, possibility of all your theories. I do think that the way in which Trump is sucking up to Putin is different than the way he's sucking up to other autocrats, especially since it was Russia who has been named as the country that hacked the election.
Well, yes and no. I mean, he sat there with Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the leader of Saudi Arabia, the country that sent us 17 of the 9/11 hijackers, the country that is the largest funder of terrorism, of radical Islamic terrorism in the world, that their Wahhabism is largely responsible for. And this isn't, me as some lefty saying this. This is, you'll find this in foreign policy magazines, largely responsible for the existence of both Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They brought us Osama bin Laden. He stood next to Mohammed bin Salman and basically said, hey, this guy's a great guy and he runs this country the way a country should be run. It's not just Putin, I'm telling you. But back to you, Rob.
Well, I do think the sucking up, though. My personal opinion is that there is something that these countries, maybe Saudi Arabia and Russia, have on Trump. I don't think Trump has any problem at all breaking the law if he thinks he can get away with it. And
he's been doing it his whole life.
Saudi Arabia and Russia.
Yeah. Okay, good point. Point made. Thank you, Rob. Whoops, hang on just a second here. Rob, thank you very much for the call. Gary in Louisville, Kentucky. Gary, what's on your mind?
It's a democracy as long as you can keep it, somebody once said. Hello, Thom.
Yeah, it was Ben Franklin. To Martha, I'm forgetting her last name, Martha whatever her name was, when he walked out of the Constitutional Convention in September of 1787. Yes.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Gary. Greed has no heart, Gary. Yes.
Right. Greed has no heart ever. And I think this is what we're talking about. It always seems to come back to what I believe, but FDR believed. And we have, first of all, one has to understand, and you understand it better than I, we have a culture that's basically upside down from what we know, the America that we once knew. And Mr. Trump, he's not here to defend himself, but Mr. Trump, I think, has a lot of narcissistic qualities, and that is not good in a leader.
Right. It's actually downright dangerous. Hitler was a narcissist.
It is downright dangerous, and we're becoming a reflection of that. We're like a mirror. How long can you keep blaming the politicians? Sometimes we've got to look inward and look at ourselves. That we're making matters worse, and by not getting active, as you well say, and throwing these people on, recognizing that America is much more than greed, ego, and trying to be famous. There's something much more to us than that.
Yeah, I think he is right now, Gary. I think he's in survival mode, but who knows? Gary, thank you for the call. It's always nice to hear from you, and very well said. Very articulate, clear Thank you for that. Vic in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Vic, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I think you hit the nail right on the head, but the fourth alternative is all three of them are correct.
Yeah.
And, Russia's the last bastion of money supply for Trump, who's a terrible businessman, going bankrupt 4 times. And you're right, he sucks up to all the dictators out there because he's a narcissistic sociopath himself. And number 3, I'm sure the Russians and Saudi Arabia may have some personal, egregious takes on Donald Trump because, Donald Trump, his sexual exploits with Stormy Daniels and...
But see, I don't think he cares about that because he knows that his base doesn't care. After the grab them by the crotch tape came out, the Access Hollywood Billy Bush tape came out, his base just shrugged it off. And some of the men in his base said, hey, I wish I could do that. I mean, if the PP tape comes out or it comes out that he was sleeping with hookers when he was in Moscow, I think, frankly, the Democrats are going to be horrified, of course. But I think on Trump's side of the aisle, essentially, the only person he's worried about getting really upset is Melania. And she is now, Stormy Daniels has been so in her face. The news cycle. She knows now that Donald was unfaithful to her during that year right after she gave birth to Barron Trump. She has to know that. And she has reconciled herself to that. So if it comes out that he was screwing Russian hookers as well as American porn stars, I think she's just going to shrug her shoulders because she's made peace with it. So I don't think he cares about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. But I don't think it's just hookers peeing on the bed. I think it's a little bit more involved with the tape covers a little bit more than that. I think that's just a sort of a cover story that the Republicans came up with. I think it's much more egregious. I think it's maybe these hookers were involved in golden showers or something where they actually urinate on each other. Because Donald Trump would have pissed on the bed himself. I'm sorry if I used the wrong word.
No, that's okay. It's not good to say, but it's not illegal. But yeah, it's possible, Vic. I'm just laying out the scenarios. I have preferences, but they're not because preference is the wrong word. I have ranked them in what I think is the probability, the order of probability. But we're going to have to wait for Mueller for a lot of this. Vic, thanks for the call. Ace in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Ace, what's up?
Oh, I'm on? Oh,
you are on.
Good.
Thank you for waiting almost 40 minutes. I appreciate it. What's on your mind?
Okay, I'm glad I'm hearing you. I'm glad I got in. I've called a few times but never got on. I'm a long-time listener for like at least 7 years.
Wow. Well, thank you. And thanks for watching us on YouTube. So what's on your mind, Ace?
Okay. I just wanted to say that it's Occam's razor. He is a Nazi. He is a fascist. And to that extent, he is going to do everything the Nazis are going to do. The writing's on the wall. And to that extent, I believe, as a former soldier of the U.S. Army, we need to start thinking about counter coup d'etat, and to that end, you need to get in on your program the Redneck Revolt. Write that down, Redneck Revolt. And I don't know if he's been released yet. He was illegally arrested. Daryl Dixon, that's his real name, the founder of Redneck Revolt, which saved Cornel West when they did their what's it called? What was it called when the Germans did that whole smashing of the windows? Kristallnacht? Yeah. Basically tried to destroy.
Ace, I'm not going to go down this road. I'm just not going to go down the road. Any road that might lead to violence ain't going to happen. Will in Broomfield, Colorado. Hey, Will, your thoughts?
Tom, I think you're off base as far as Trump's motives with regard to the way government should be run. I don't think he cares. I don't think he can spell the word government. I think...
You don't think he's frustrated by democracy, small d democracy?
I don't think he cares about it. I think he looks at Vladimir Putin, who is unofficially, never mind Carlos Slim or Gates or anybody like that, Putin is unofficially the richest man in the world, and Trump is like the kid pressed up against the plate glass window of the toy store saying, I want that. All he wants is to be like Putin. He wants to be an oligarch. And if he, like I said, I don't think he can spell the word government, let alone democracy. And it's not that complicated. He's pure it. All he wants is everything.
Yeah, it may well be.
Democracy, autocracy, whatever.
It may well be. So that becomes the fourth option, is that Trump is just insanely greedy, and he wants absolute power and absolute wealth. And he sees, all these various things, the, autocracy, alignment with autocratic regimes around the world, possibly martial law, as a means to that end. Will, well said. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls after this. And welcome back. Oh, let's see here. Robbie in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Robbie, what's on your mind?
I just wanted to mention a couple things about this Helsinki summit here. And you were asking, what are the options here? I think it's a combination, combination of quite a few of them. Merkley came out saying that they had something like that, in essence, to the blackmail. I think that it's probably going to be, and here's how I look at Trump, though. I look at him as a patsy. That the oligarchs controlling the money, when you follow that, and you see that these people are being put into power, he's just the one who's realigning our alliances as we speak. You said it, Philippines, North Korea, Russia, what we're doing right now. It looks like he's setting us up for that downfall. He's setting up the world stage for an intervention with America. And while he's forming these new alliances, it seems to be that money is getting away with it.
Yeah. So, well, that's my 15% scenario. Basically, he's doing what Steve Bannon said that they were going to do when he came into the White House.
Exactly. Yeah, well, the private military corporations and a lot of the Defense Department, they need the funding for this because right now, we were on that road to trying to do it. But, Syria, where FBI and the CIA are creating, factions against each other, I think right now what we're going to witness is kind of that start of the alliance and then that little push. But anyway, thank you for the time. I'll just leave it on there. But
sure.
Actually, can I tell you something real quick? My dad, he called me the other night, and it was kind of scary because his cable internet went out, and he is ex-CIA. He was in Cambodia during the Vietnam War doing and briefing intelligence for the world, or, the world report for the American government's CIA, the FBI. And he called me freaking out because when this came out that his kids were providing the intelligence through that, I guess they showed a picture of what that report looked, and he freaked out because it was the same report that he used to draft up when he was in there. And he was surprised that that's even happening now. He's so confused with how the government is letting this happen. He said that never would have flew. If a standing president like JFK or somebody tried to provide an intelligence report like that to another government community, they would be taken out before that ever happened. And then
are you talking about when Trump had Kislyak and Lavrov in the Oval Office and he gave them Israeli intelligence? Is that what you're talking about?
I don't know if it was the Israeli intelligence. This was not. This was, from my understanding, it was the intelligence that Jared Kushner gave out. I don't know.
Oh yeah, that story just kind of flew by. It was a one-day story.
So that freaked my dad out because he said that was the exact format, the exact style of briefings of the top security clearance that he used to make, and he was so surprised that that's even happening because back, I guess, when he was a part of it, that wouldn't have ever flew.
Well, I think Kushner lost his security clearance over that, and then he got it back because Trump basically ordered them to give it to him. I mean, this is how these guys have to feel like, the professionals in the business of security who are government employees, not just toady contractors in it for the buck. They have to feel like their back is against the wall big time.
This is where I link the money back to it because if you want to see, the military arms industry, they need these alliances altered. They need this to happen for that war they're pushing for.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what we're doing. Anyway, thanks a lot, Thom.
Remarkable stuff. Robbie, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to X-Ray FM in Portland. Here in Portland, broadcasting live from Portland. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane among us, where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, not a chance. Get out of my face. We'll be right back. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
With your minimum 3-bottle order. Well, welcome back. And your thoughts on what's going on here. Dave in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dave, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom. Thank you, sir. John Schindler, and he can be found at 20 committee. John Schindler was a NSA agent that worked for a Signet department who within the NSA who did auditing. He tracked Trump from the late 80s through the housing crash of the early 90s, and he said that personally he was in debt over $1 billion. That isn't his business. That was him personally. And that he said by the late 90s he was flush with over $1 billion cash personally again, and he doesn't know how that happened because he wasn't able to look at his taxes, but he said that the investigation of his corruption needs to start there. Yep. In the early 90s, when he became flush, and by the late 90s when he became flush with cash. And then he also said that there is a tape, and the PP tape does not exist, he said. He said he knows the tape, and that he said it's way worse. He said very few humans, he said a PP tape, people, even evangelicals could maybe stomach it. But he said the tape that actually is out there is way worse. It would be disgusting to just about every human being alive, and that it would be very difficult for any of us to accept it.
Yeah, the one possibility that occurs to me since Trump has been tied up with Jeffrey Epstein, who was having parties with underage girls, and the BBC, I played this report on the air last week, the BBC reporting that Donald Trump either put on or was at parties where young women under 17, one was 14 years old, were literally brought to these parties to have sex with older, very, very wealthy American men in New York City. And so if he was getting it on with a hooker in Russia, and the hooker turned out to be 13 or 14 years old, that could be a disaster for him. I get that. Dave, thanks for the call. There's so many possibilities, so little time. Brandon in Seattle. Hey, Brandon, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What do you think?
Yeah, so I totally agree that Russia had a stake in the election, and they preferred Trump to win over Hillary. But what I'm struggling to figure out is if they would have just preferred any Republican over Hillary, because the hacking is really what the question is here into the DNC and the servers, and then releasing information that they found, that could have helped potentially any Republican. So I'm struggling to find why they would hack, not even knowing if Trump would have been the nominee yet.
Yeah. Well, and I think the answer, going back to Occam's razor, typically the best example is the easiest example, or explanation rather, is that Trump stood on the world stage, during that debate and looked right into the camera and said, Russia, if you can get access to Hillary Clinton's emails, bring it on. We'll love you. The world will love you. And 6-7 hours later, the process, according to Robert Mueller's indictment, the process actually began, coming out of Russia. So I think it was, they were called out by a national American politician, a major candidate, saying, hey, would you help? And, somebody there said, yeah, sure. So anyway, Helen in Sun City, Arizona. Helen, your thoughts?
Hello?
Hey, Helen, you're on the air.
Good. I wanted to mention something that I saw on TV about 3 weeks ago. I've been trying to get in. The guy that Trump has put up for the Supreme Court, I watched him on TV explain why no sitting president should have to deal with legal issues while in office.
Right. That's why Trump picked him. Brett Kavanaugh, I was predicting for a full week before this happened. You can go back and look at the shows. And thank you, Helen, for pointing that out. I was predicting Brett Kavanaugh would be his pick because Brett Kavanaugh was publicly on the record as saying that he thought that a special counsel like Robert Mueller was unconstitutional, should not exist, and they should be able to dump him. Kevin in Tracy, California. Kevin, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk regarding Trump and the martial law and everything. I think that there's going to be an alliance between U.S. and Russia and Philippines and Turkey and Hungary and Poland, and I think that that's going to be the beginning of World War III. What are your thoughts about an alliance like that?
I think that if we allied ourselves with the more right-wing regimes around the world, and I would throw China into that loop, and probably Singapore as well, and Malaysia and Indonesia, and some of the countries across the Horn of Africa, particularly Egypt, that would probably reduce the probability of a world war. I don't think the Europeans are interested in a world war, and that would be basically the Europeans and the Canadians would be the only small d democratic forces left. I mean, you've got some major countries to the south of us that are democracies, Mexico, Brazil in particular. But Brazil is just, crashing and burning internally politically. And, Mexico is going to be going through a big transformation. But I think that rather than leading to war, it would simply lead to the end, ultimately, of democracy or the splitting of the world into basically democratic states and undemocratic states, which has been the case for a long, long time. It's just that a lot of these states that had been democratic over the last, through much of my lifetime, would become undemocratic. Boy, a lot to digest, a lot to think about. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow. It's going to be a fascinating day tomorrow, too. And in the meantime, don't forget, this whole thing, politics, American democracy, it's not a spectator sport. We need you and all your friends. Tell everybody about our media. Tell everybody to get registered. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair chair, office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com.